vegan sausage roll.
So the presidential debate was bad then, right? I've heard lots of bad things about what happened during the presidential debate. Funny clips, though. It's funny. Probably not good for democracy or the world, but funny. It's funny. I mean, Bernie is almost as old as Biden, and he's still got, like, his head screwed on. Biden shat the bed and possibly his pants. Good. Good. Love it. Although there was an incredible moment. I think somebody... there's a very funny clip that I... let me find it. This one. Yeah. Let me just change this orientation. So this is the only clip that I've seen of the actual debate. Is that one on the bottom there? Let me bring it up. So this is the only clip that I've seen.
System, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID. Excuse me, with dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare.
What the hell is this debate? All it reminded me of was this incredible Biden moment.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was going to excuse me.
Oh dear Lord, what the fuck is this country? What's happening? What on earth is happening? Incredible. What's really funny as well, right? So it's been kind of widely reported, really and truly, that people people like inside the DNC were essentially just living in dreamland, and they thought that polls were going to narrow eventually, and there wasn't going to be a real problem with Joe Biden's ability to be able to govern properly, and that eventually the poll problems would be fine as soon as the economy got moving. And it just hasn't. And they thought, oh, it's fine, we could put him into the debates. And then, oh no, everything's gone to shit.
Fucking neoliberalism.
It's Joe Ever for the US and Starmergeddon in the UK. RIP democracy.
I know, right? And the thing is that the left have been saying that they have to ditch Biden. I mean, the polls that have been coming out, right? So my favourite kind of polling artifact of what's going on in American politics right now is that people fucking hate the Republicans. They really do. They just will not vote for Joe Biden for plenty of reasons. Because if you look at the polling state by state for competitive Senate races, like not partisan Senate races, but for competitive Senate races, the Democrats are on course for a clean sweep. The Democrats are going to clean sweep all of the Senate races that are supposed to be competitive. West Virginia is not going to be competitive, so I'm not including that. But even like places like Montana, is John Tester right? That should not be a blue state ever, 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 ever. Yeah, it's not supposed to be a blue state, Montana. Yet John Tester is predicted to win. All of the swing states, just blue, 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 blue. Across the board, they're predicted to win. In all of those states where they're predicted to win the Senate race, the close competitive Senate race, Joe Biden is polling behind Trump, and this is exactly why. And they've been deluded. The people in the background have been fucking deluded about all of this. And now we've got to see all of the articles from all of the papers, right? All of the liberal media papers saying, oh, well, now they have to get rid of Joe Biden. And I'm just going to be sitting here saying, we told you so. Just going to sit here saying that I told you so is the thing that, and they're just going to, they fucked themselves. They've just completely fucked themselves. Exactly. Liberal arrogance is exactly what it is. Just put Bernie in at the last moment. Honestly, the only thing that can save them now is putting Bernie in at the last minute. This is how Bernie can still win, guys. To be a leftist is to be cursed with functional long-term memory, exactly. Bernie with a steel chair, absolutely. This is what we need. I mean, I guess they got Gretchen Whitmer. I guess is probably like the most kind of capable candidate potentially. It is incredibly depressing. Funny though. At least it's happening over there. Like it makes us feel better about how shit our politics is. It makes us feel better about how garbage our politics is. At least it's not Biden versus Trump, right? At least it's not Biden versus Trump. That'd be like, honestly, I'm so sorry, Americans. What content of his words? His words didn't make sense, my rear end. Oh yeah, I saw that they, again, just subcontracting out all of our international diplomatic and foreign policy decisions. So just subcontracting all of those out to the American State Department. You're welcome to sovereign Britain post-Brexit. Would I say it's in the bag for Trump? Yes. It is funny because like they obviously won't replace Biden with anybody. You know, it's too late. Whatever, we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, this is an American politics channel. So looking forward to Lammy being chummy with Trump. Yeah, speaking of fucking David Lammy. Speaking of David Lammy, did anybody see the New Statesman cover? Right? The New Statesman. And literally, Matt Kennard, obviously with the base take as always, right? Matt Kennard, never with a terrible take. Literally, I cannot believe real adult humans pay £5.75 to read this magazine. Yeah, the Lammy doctrine. Then was he saying that he wants to be progressive realism is his plan? And I'm just like, well, if it's realism, then you can't choose whether it's progressive or not. But anyway, right? This is the cover of the New Statesman. You've got interview with David Lammy about why he's turned into a conservative all along. You've got interview with UK's foremost insurgent ultra-nationalist politician, Nigel Farage, right? Nothing wrong with that at all in your supposedly liberal paper. You've got Andrew Marr just kind of ignoring the fact that everyone hates politicians and politics because of people like him. And then you've also got a fucking absolutely disgusting rancid turfoid rat at the bottom there as well. Just like this paper, this could literally be the cover of the Spectator. Like everything, like you literally identical to a cover of a paper. It's identical to a cover that you could see on the Spectator. Identical to something you'd see on the Spectator. Is the same font as the Spectator? Probably. Like you know, serif fonts are shit anyway. No one did more to beat the far right than me. Well, yeah. What about the Red Army? Like. Only difference between that and the Spectator cover is David Baddiel's name not being next to Tacky. I mean, Hannah Barnes basically has the same opinion on social issues as basically every single writer at the Spectator anyway, so. Oh yeah, War with Iran, looking forward to that. Absolutely. Progressive realism time, let's go. And again, all of this because we couldn't tell Benjamin Netanyahu no. All of this is because we couldn't spend any time saying, no, Benny boy, no, maybe don't do that. Don't do that. Have I done the ITV interview with Keir Starmer? No. Oh yeah, she did. Like she's absolutely fucking rancid, yeah. And talks about wanting 10 years as PM. I did see that. I did see that he wanted 10 years as PM. He'll probably get it. I think that the barrier to Keir Starmer getting 10 years as PM isn't necessarily the electorate. It's really difficult for governments to lose elections, right? So it's really difficult for oppositions to win elections, rather. Incumbent governments lose elections, and it's clear that the establishment are really behind Keir Starmer very specifically. So I don't think it'd be difficult for him to get 10 years. I just think the issue, of course, is what's probably more likely is that the Labour right will jettison him for fucking Wes or Rachel Reeves as soon as they get an opportunity, right? They've ridden the Starmer train up to the highest of offices possible, and then suddenly he's useless. He's not useful to them anymore. They'll fucking ditch him. He voted for the Iraq War. Like, you think that the Labour Party wouldn't put somebody who voted for that war in the Foreign Office? Will it becoming Adrian Ramsey question time tonight? We'll cover that tomorrow. Well, to be fair, depending how long it takes, right?
A communist.
I mean, if I'm on here for ages, then, you know, if it gets to however late in the day, I might end up watching QT as well. But I don't even know what time it's on. I mean, we're starting at 3, so have a pretty long stream. Like, someone in chat saying Starmer is a socialist. It's a fucking liberal. He's like the most liberalist liberal ever. Apart from he's a liberal who seems to hate like people having civil liberties, because he's very happy to just continue with all of the authoritarian anti-civil liberty policy that the Conservative Party have pushed through while he's been in power. Starmer's a placemat for Tony Blair's clone. Well, yeah, exactly. Exactly. At least if I know they usurp Starmer to make Bridget Phillipson Prime Minister or something, at least we'd have someone with a Geordie accent. I guess she's a Mackham accent. She's from Sunderland, right? At least we have a Mackham as Prime Minister. You know what? At least I'll take that tiny bit of representation as a win. We'll see. Calling Starmer a socialist is like calling ice cream a curry. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the means of production not coming any closer to being owned by the workers. Like, he seems to actively oppose it. I mean, Rachel Reeves was talking today. There was an article, actually, was yesterday in the Times. Alex Wickham was commenting, I think it was at the Mirror, I forget. Either way, talking about how Rachel Reeves wants to help de-risk the financial sector from getting investments in infrastructure. And I'm just like, so it's PFIs on steroids, where we're going to use the power of the state to help like private capital rentiers being able to extract money out of our society. And I'm just like, this is just fucking the government for the rich. There's a reason why Rachel Reeves said to the banks, our manifesto has all of your hands on it. Like, yeah, of course it does. That's why it doesn't have anything for working people in it, despite their claims that they do. Thank you, Nick the Peasant, for the 5 gifted. Appreciate the support. BlackRock rebuilding Britain. Literally. Well, there's a reason why Larry Fink said... There's a reason why Larry Fink said that Keir Starmer would be a good Prime Minister. I'm full of shit. Starmer's a member of a socialist party. Well, Labour is not a socialist party. Like, at the very most, they're just a liberal party. Again, like, they can say they're socialists, but then again, like the Nazis said they were socialists, and they believed in capitalism just like anybody else. Would Angela Rayner be in the running once they ditch Starmer? Nah. No chance. Anyway, let's watch Politics Live with Zach Polanski on it.
It's Wednesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. With more politicians being looked at for alleged betting on the election, how much deeper will the scandal go?
I think the public wants politicians to abide by
fucking 4%, Liz. Jesus.
the rules. Just
even most of the left of the Labour Party was only social democratic. Well, yeah, literally, exactly. Like, no one from the Labour left has ever proposed anything other than social democracy outside of, I guess, the inclusive ownership funds.
as they have to.
I think we have to have a proper debate and a thoughtful debate about this rather than any knee-jerk reactions in terms of what we do more broadly going forward.
More chance of Angela Rayner being buried in the foundations of a BlackRock-owned school than becoming PM? Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. Like, anybody from the Labour right would let someone from a council estate become Prime Minister. Never happening, never happening.
Labour promises to end the 8 a.m. scramble for GP appointments. Also, we'll discuss...
Things that, do you know what Labour's plan for ending the GP appointment rush is? Yeah, their plan is to just have an NHS app. That's it. It's their plan, by the way.
The growing sense of fear among politicians about violent attacks.
We all feel passionate about things. It's not an excuse for violence. It's not an excuse to tell someone you're going to kill them, or rape them, or kill their child.
And tonight, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the final...
I'm assuming they're just going to do things with the NHS app, because the NHS app at the moment doesn't really do very much.
Televised debate of the election campaign. Joining us today, the former chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee, Conservative Steve Brine, Labour's Deputy National Campaign Coordinator Ellie Reeves.
Reeves? Oh, that sounds weird. Is she related to the current Shadow... Oh, of course she is. There's all fucking club in it. Looking forward to having Wes Streeting and Wes Streeting's boyfriend both getting safe seats forever. Yeah.
The Deputy Leader of the Green Party, Zach Polansky, and the Editor-in-Chief of the news website Unheard, Freddie Sayers. This is Politics Live, Election
Unheard,
2024. Welcome. Well, there are further developments, as you heard in the headlines, on the political gambling saga.
True. If he's so good at hypnosis, why doesn't he hypnotise the electorate? Sorry, I kid. If you're watching this, Zach, we love you, really. It's just a joke. £5 from Kirstian, thank you for the super chat. Love your content, can't wait to see how the country is falling apart at the seams today. Looking forward to it. I've seen a bit of clips from this bit, so it should be pretty fun.
Scandal over the past 24 hours. Let's have a look at some of the headlines, starting with the Financial Times. UK election betting scandal deepens as Labour suspends candidate, whom you can see there. If we look at The Guardian, election betting, fifth...
Does VPN work at avoiding roaming charges? It doesn't. I mean, it depends what network you're on. If you're on O2, you get 25 gig of free roaming anyway.
Tory investigated in growing scandal. Welsh politician Russell George told by Gambling Commission he is part of the inquiry. And then finally, the BBC Cabinet Minister Alistair Jack, you can see there, admits 3 election bets, 2 unsuccessful, 1 successful, he says, and says he's done nothing wrong. Well, let's talk to the BBC's chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman. He joins us from Nottingham in the sunshine, where the BBC's head-to-head debate is taking place this evening between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. Henry, it will probably feature, if not perhaps dominate, part of the discussion this evening. How much further is this?
Thank you for the super chat.
This evening. Let's go back to the issue about placing bets in terms of the election. In your mind, Steve, there are different categories here that we are talking about. Is this now a case of sort of a moral principle in terms of politicians and what they should and shouldn't do? Or has there been an overreaction?
A bit of both. I mean, if you ask anybody out there today, what are the Conservatives trying to land as their message of the day in the campaign, which is pressure on Rachel Reeves future tax rises, FYI, but I bet nobody else knows that because this is just dominating the landscape. So I've never placed a bet on myself to win, let alone lose an election.
Thank you for
I mean,
disclosure.
When I used to stand for elections, I kind of bet myself in my own mind to win every time.
Now, Solly, it's nepo-liberalism.
And it's peculiar to bet against yourself to lose. There may well be a case for the party leaders after the election and the new House of Commons to look at different rules around whether MPs should take part in election betting. I think probably Mel Stride's right that you should do that at leisure instead of at haste. It's all a bit unseemly. And frankly, you know, I think that the Labour Party today are a bit like the England football team, right? The top of the group. They're almost certainly progressing through to the next stage, and yet utterly unconvincing, and they haven't really shown any leg at all, so nobody knows what they'll do. And that's okay in the good times, right? It must be a dream to be Labour coordinator right now because there's no scrutiny. But when you come up against, tough times, or Spain or Holland.
I mean, why is there no scrutiny? You'd have thought, right, chat, you'd have thought that, you know, with all of these plans laid out, that they've got this whole manifesto thing, all of the things and the mood music they've been talking about for the last however many years since, you know, they started building up a party platform. You thought that there should have been at least some amount of criticism. Oh my God, there's an incredible tweet from Brian Roden. Let me find it. Honestly, just everything wrong with our political discourse in this country, just summarised in one tweet. Yeah, this is the one. It's also easier to say to a journalist, I fought the Tories hard in coalition and tried to swerve away, When it's a voter challenging on broken pledges, it's more uncomfortable for a politician. Why is it easier? Why is it easier to be able to ignore a journalist's question than it is to ignore a voter's question? Surely it would be much harder, it should be much harder to be able to avoid the scrutiny of actual journalists whose job it is, who are professionals supposedly at criticising politicians. Yet the public, who have better things to be doing, who have more important things to be doing, have lives to live rather than spending all day, every day criticising politicians. Why is it easier? Why is it easier to be able to bat away questions from journalists who are literally the people whose job it is to hold them to account? It's good to see you, Mark, as well. I mean, the basic is true, Rob. Yeah, the general public are more qualified than our journalists. Because again, our journalists' qualifications is basically just, I went to private school. I went to Oxbridge, right? That is my qualification. Yeah, absolutely. Peak hipster analysis.
Then what happens? And that's where my analogy ends, Jo.
Yes, thank goodness for that. But they are, as you say, the top of the table. I mean, this is the England football team, not necessarily the Labour Party. Ellie, how do you judge this whole gambling issue in terms of bets being placed on timings of election or winning or losing contests?
He challenged the Labour candidate at the hustings you went to about the cuts, and he said Labour hasn't ruled out increasing capital gains tax. I mean, that's true, they haven't ruled it out. I think most people are kind of now assuming that they are going to do it, which is quite funny after all of those times telling us they weren't going to do it. Rachel Reeves having an article saying that they weren't going to do it. And now apparently it's something that they probably are going to do. But why not run on it? Why lie? Why lie to the electorate? If you have plans to do it, tell them so we can vote for you. Because I want to vote for it. I want to vote for increasing capital gains taxes. Not in the manifesto, so I'm not voting for it. I'm going to vote for the Green Party because they are promising an increasing capital gains tax.
Well, actually, for me, Jo, it's an issue of leadership. It took Rishi Sunak, I think, 13 days to suspend Conservative candidates who had placed these bets. That shows a weakness in leadership. When Keir Starmer discovered that one of the Labour candidates was under investigation by the Gambling Commission, he took very swift action and immediately suspended him. And that's the difference. So I think there's an issue around leadership here. It's really important that...
Oh yeah, I did see Dale Vince campaigning against the Green Party, yeah, James. Yeah, I'm not surprised. He's a fucking Labour shill. Just like Best for Britain is like a Labour op. Did you see this? Best for Britain were recommending Labour in all Labour SNP marginals because they think that Scotland gets more of a voice if they have a Labour branch party as part of the national government rather than having an actual dedicated Scottish party in charge being able to fight for their interests specifically, right? Yeah, Best for Britain, a fucking Labour op every single day. Carol Vorderman, Dale Vince, all these tactical voting people, turns out, right, just Labour shills. Just Labour shills. Oh no, you can't vote for the smaller parties. They might get more access to short money funding and access to platforms to be able to use to spread their message. No, you have to keep voting for the red team. I did NWA, yeah, it was interesting.
That rules are followed, and there are rules around gambling, and it's important that those rules are followed. There are investigations going on.
Well, there are clear rules about using information that you have had, privileged information, because that obviously then is no longer gambling. You know what the outcome of something is going to be, and placing a bet just randomly or not on something you don't have any prior information about.
You know, no one's saying that the MP shouldn't be able to have a flutter, but the issue here is about the rules and what's under investigation. And, an investigation was launched into a Labour candidate and Keir Starmer took swift action, in contrast to what the Prime Minister did.
Freddie?
We've just got to have some perspective here. I mean, we are one...
I wonder, right, chap, what's the over-under, do you think, about... We're discussing this candidate here, Kevin Craig, I think his name was, right? They've been given this... Ellie Reeves just like, it shows you Keir Starmer's leadership that he got rid of the support for this candidate. Did it show Keir Starmer's leadership when this guy was allowed to be appointed by the NEC suspiciously soon after donating £100,000 to the party? Because we're now only talking about the whole betting thing, his betting against himself, a small bet that he made, and how excellent Keith was at removing the support, right? Now nobody's talking about the £100,000 donation. I wonder if anybody's going to mention that. It's weird. It's just like when George Osborne was in the news for having confetti thrown over him by a miraculous person who was not related to Justin Boyle, orange confetti, just on the day that email got leaked alleging George Osborne's impropriety. Weird how these things seem to coincide.
Week ahead of a general election, we face huge issues as a country. The IFS says there is a conspiracy of silence between your two parties about future funding issues. And what are we talking about? We're talking about this tiny issue around gambling. It's very typical, actually, of the way our elections tend to take place. I mean, nobody is getting rich out of this. Nobody is throwing elections just to win a bob or two. And frankly, as we all know, working in politics has few pleasures. And if people want to have a flutter on these things, I think it should be fine. And so if we want to talk about...
Oh, yes, working in politics has very few pleasures. I mean, getting 91k a year as a salary is a pretty good pleasure to me. I don't know about you, right? Maybe you're making money hand over fist as a deputy editor for Unheard. You know, getting all of your stuff in your pockets full of Paul Marshall's cash. I'm sure you must think that being an MP is all very difficult and sad, but unfortunately, for the rest of us earning 20k, right, quadrupling our salary by becoming an MP is a pretty big fucking deal. And then also being able to get really good jobs in industry afterwards, like, as you said in chat, Nick Clegg did, yeah? Saw an interview with Blair yesterday, and he was saying that we should pay politicians more. Who's this guy, deputy editor for Unheard?
Corruption, if we want to talk about cronyism, let's talk about things like the £1.4 billion of PPE that the BBC uncovered is going to be destroyed, literally burnt, having been bought by the government in panic during the COVID crisis. That's what we should be talking about, not gambling.
Right. Get a bit of perspective.
Well, I think these things are important. And actually, you talked about PPE and the fact that there are allegations against a number of Conservative staffers, candidates in relation to betting. I think the public think, well, is this another example, again, of one rule for them and one for everyone else? And the fact that it did take Rishi Sunak so long to...
Oh, God, she literally has the same fucking voice. Oh, my God. Ugh. You just close your eyes and imagine the cat with the melon helmet.
Take action does make it look like that.
All right, Zach, just before I come to you, I just want to play this because Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, has been asked, we've had disclosure from you, Steve, have you ever placed a bet on election outcome?
No, I've
right, just to check. You, Zach? No. OK, well, we've cleared that up. Let's just have a listen to Ed Davey.
So you placed a bet on the outcome of the 2010 election?
Well, I said that I thought we were going to do better as a party. I thought the Liberal Democrats were going to gain more seats. I was quite excited. I don't usually bet, but I bet on that occasion, and I lost.
Where are you? Where do you think the moral outrage, rightly or wrongly, should be? Or is it a case of more perspective, as Freddie says?
I think there's a little bit of truth in all of this, and it comes back to this case of there's different groups of allegations. I think if someone clearly knew the date and they have betted, that is a huge, serious problem. And I think it's a problem that is in line with the PPE allegations. It's a problem in line with Partygate. It's a problem in line with that general sense from the public that politicians are in it for themselves, that they don't trust politicians. And actually, frankly, it smears all of us when people behave like this. So I do agree with Ali. I think it's about leadership, but not just leadership from the top of the parties, but actually every single representative taking responsibility for their actions, how they behave. And I think some of these candidates have been found sorely lacking.
Right, and if that was the case with a Green candidate, you would want them suspended immediately then?
Well, I think that's a conversation about exactly what they've done and the round of allegation. But if a Green candidate did know when the general election was, then yes, they should be gone.
Well, that, of course, is clearer in terms of insider.
The thing I would just add about the Prime Minister is that,
Yeah, that is true. It's interesting how it seems to have expanded out to just any kind of election bet, when some of them, I think, are, like, less egregious than others. Like, betting against yourself, I think, it's bad, but because you can affect it by not campaigning properly. But broadly, you can't campaign so badly that you would definitely deliberately lose, right? That's not like Mazar Majid stuff. And I think we've kind of really forgotten the real where this started, which was people who had insider information making bets, which was literally defrauding bookmakers under the rules of the Gambling Commission. If it's true that they knew and they placed that bet whilst knowing, that is defrauding a bookmaker. That is literally Mohammed Amir spot fixing type shit. But we've not been proven yet, so we don't know until the Gambling Commission does their investigation. And that's what's terrible. That's what's really bad. That is literally defrauding. I mean, it's bad if you think the bookmakers being defrauded is bad. You know me, I can give a shit people defraud bookmakers. Fucking hate those people. But even so. And now we're just talking about bets against themselves. This isn't relevant to like the actual real stuff, which is Rishi Sunak's people. One of his advisors, wasn't it? Part of his campaign team, I think it was, who has been suspended because they placed a bet on the election timing. I'm not sure.
You know, there were allegations made, and if there's improper behaviour that is contrary to the law, then that's being looked at rightly. That's not for us to discuss on a TV programme. The Prime Minister's done a very quick internal investigation by the sounds of it, which has allowed him to then to suspend the candidates. Keir Starmer seems to have just sort of rushed to judgment and chopped somebody. You know, I'm glad he's not my lawyer, quite frankly, because I thought we had due process in this country. And, you know, the Prime Minister's maybe shown himself to be prime ministerial and showing a little bit of judgment, a little bit of poise, a little bit of calm, and showing a little bit of perspective. Well, in which case, hopefully we'll talk about some issues.
Well, and here we are. Let's get to them. The front page of The Mirror, ahead of the election campaign. Labour pledge on doctors will end 8 a.m. GP scramble. I'm sure lots of our viewers have experienced difficulties, let's put it that way, with trying to get GP appointments. Let's talk to Professor Camilla Hawthorne, Chair of the Royal College of GPs. Camilla, welcome to you. First of all, it seems to have become emblematic in a way of what critics would generally say is broken Britain. You can't get a GP appointment. Is that how you see it too?
Good afternoon, first of all, Joe. Yes, I think that it's a real problem, and we're just as frustrated and upset about this as our patients are. You know, it's we're there to give a service. We've been trained for many years. We're anxious to give a high quality service, and it's becoming really difficult. Certainly in my practice, we keep changing our appointment systems because we keep trying to increase the capacity, but the demand is always greater than the capacity. That's the problem.
Right. While we're chatting, we're going to show some pictures of the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, and Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary. They're on a visit at a GP surgery in Derbyshire. But you've described, you say you're frustrated too. Why is it then that GP practices and surgeries vary so much from one to another? I mean, there doesn't seem to be any consistency.
So GP practices are all independent organisations. They're independent contractors, and they run their practices in their own way. And of course, they serve different communities. So some will be in a very dispersed area in a rural community. Some will be in an inner city deprived area.
Yeah, Labour's plan is literally to update the NHS app. That's their plan. And I think there was hiring more GPs as well, which is fine. Like, again, that's part of their workforce plan paid for by the non-dom tax status changes. I've heard it so many times I can just repeat it verbatim now, but we're just going to update the app. Like, okay. Just like they're using AI in job centres, just say technology will do it. But then again, where's the investment going to come from to do all of these software updates? Yeah.
Some will be in the leafy suburbs, and so they can adapt their services to the communities they serve. But you know, we have been working a lot harder overall than we've ever done before. We're providing well over 1 million appointments a day in England, and in fact, since the last, I suppose, 2018, 30 to 50 million more appointments a year with fewer GPs, because GPs are leaving the profession faster than they're entering it. So we're about 880 short of where we were a few years.
It's almost like, right, it's almost like a chat that we should be paying our NHS staff more because GPs are leaving, junior doctors are leaving, nurses are leaving for better wages, either in that profession in other countries or just in different professions. There was a point at which, before we had like the nurses' strikes and the increase in their pay grade, loads of these nurses could just quit being nurses and stack shelves in Tesco and get paid more. Like, I'm not saying the shelf stackers in Tesco should get paid little. I think they should join a trade union and get higher wages just like everybody else. But that's within a private market where wages are decided by people wanting to attract staff, whereas the public sector is set by the government. And if they don't at least allow there to be something that gets people to work for them by attracting them with good wages, they will go somewhere else, whether it's abroad or a different particular sector.
Years ago. And of course, we're dealing with patients who, as a community, are aging with more complex chronic problems.
Right, just before I open it up to our guests here, on that note, a recent survey by the British Medical Association showed that more than 4 in 5 locum GPs in England are unable to find work, with a third forced to leave the NHS because they can't make ends meet. How does that stack up with what you've just said? Is there
Yeah, but that would cost 1.3 billion instead of the 3 billion that's been spent resisting the strikes. Simply not value for money for the Tories' rates. I mean, a taxpayer. Simply not value for money for the Tories' mates. You mean the taxpayer? Or literally, that's it, isn't it? Or indeed, right? Not just the money spent resisting the strikes, but also the amount of money that we spend on locum contracts of people working through private recruiters, paying all of the extra on top for the private recruiters. For locum staff, which we wouldn't need to do if these people just centrally contracted with the NHS with a better rate of pay.
There aren't enough doctors.
So aren't enough GPs. This is a real paradox, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's happened quite suddenly about 6 to 8 months ago. Before that, you just weren't enough GPs at all. And GPs were very much in demand. Now, all of a sudden, we've discovered that practices are finding it really financially impossible to employ as many GPs as they need for their patients. And that's due to years and years of underfunding and under-resourcing of practices. That has just gradually been getting worse and worse, till we've got to a point now where I have a number of GP partners who are telling me that they're taking home less than their salaried GPs and they cannot afford to employ any more. So we're now looking at a possible several hundred, maybe more, GPs out of work come the summer.
Right. I mean, Steve, listening to that, I mean, you were, as we said at the beginning, chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee. You must have looked at these issues. I mean, is it rocket science to solve this problem of people struggling to get GP appointments?
If it was simple, then it would have been solved. Okay. The reason there is great variation is because it's called the National Health Service, but of course it's not. It's a series of regional health services. And as Camilla, rightly says, the general practice exists under contract to the NHS. It's not part of the NHS. So that's why there's variation. I mean, I'm glad that Labour are talking about this today. Yeah. This is a really important issue to some people. I think Wes, who I have a lot of time and a lot of respect for, I think Wes is wrong to say that general practice is near collapse. I think that's dangerous. It's quite frightening. I had a very good experience with my GP in London last week when I had tonsillitis. I had a very good experience the very same day when my son had tonsillitis, where we got, very quick same day care. The government, to its credit, have announced its primary care recovery plan, which talks about patient access through the NHS app, for instance. It talks about modern telephony so that people don't get the engaged tone, so that they get callbacks, they know where they are in the queue. That is being rolled out, but it's too slow. The bit about building capacity in general practice, I mean, I take responsibility for the things that I didn't do well in government, but actually I did do the forerunner that is now called Pharmacy First, and I think that has been a big success. And both parties have building on the success of Pharmacy First in their manifesto, and that's really important because what that's about is taking.
I think the productivity crisis within the NHS is because of the abandonment of continuity of care because of austerity. Yeah, absolutely. I think that so many of the problems with the NHS are legacy austerity problems because, again, the budget for the NHS as a share of GDP reduced every single year from 2010 to 2016. That just continually went down. So only recently there's increased. The problems that we have are legacy problems from a failure to prepare throughout the entirety of the austerity period, the Lansley reforms, Jeremy Hunt's war with all of the NHS staff during the David Cameron government. That's where all these problems came from. Obviously, I think that Sunak and Hunt are bad as Prime Minister and as Chancellor. And of course, Rishi Sunak used to be Chancellor then as well. And Steve Barclay was a terrible NHS Secretary. So was Victoria Atkins. But they are just kind of holding the bag, holding like the broken, decaying bag of a destroyed NHS that was destroyed by Cameron and Osborne. This is all of the problems that we have. Again, talk about, oh, well, there's so much, all the internal market stuff that we've got. Yeah, it's all terrible. Get rid of all of that. Or it's not a centralized system. It's all of these different things all trying to compete with each other. I'm just like, all of the health and social care reforms that we've done to try and make this more marketized, they've just all been a gigantic failure.
Taking the wider primary care team and helping patients get what they need, because you don't always need, underlined, to see a GP. Very often you need to see a pharmacist. That's what I saw on Friday, and it did the job for me.
Yeah, and we've talked about it, but
He's not telling the whole truth. The ARRS scheme will pay the salary from central government of extra GP practice staff, so they don't have to use their local budget, but it specifically excludes employing extra GPs. Interesting, I didn't know that.
Heard there from Professor Camilla Hawthorne, underfunding. Are you going to put more funding into GP practices? I know that they are private entities in that sense. Are you going to put more funding?
Well, look, can I just start by responding to something that Steve said, which is about this is an important issue to some people. I have dealt with a huge amount of casework over the years from people unable to get GP appointments. I was speaking to a constituent recently who every day on their way to work to the station, they walk past their GP surgery and they see a queue of people round the block, and they told me they're terrified of getting ill because they know if they do, it will be incredibly difficult for them to get an appointment. So I think it's a really big issue and we shouldn't downplay it.
Our GPs are downplaying it, but it's not everybody, Ellie. Some people, and many people, have very good experiences of their general practice, and I think this is a profession that is working really hard, that does a very good job for a lot of people.
Right. We agree. I agree with a Conservative Party politician. I agree with him. GPs do work really hard. Our doctors and nurses work really hard. How about we pay them more? Rather than just paying them in claps, maybe we should pay them, in money, in legal tender, in remuneration for the hard work that they do. Just a thought.
I don't think we should just run it down on television and say that it's all a disaster and it's all part of broken Britain. There are very good parts of general practice that are doing a good job for your former constituents and my former constituents.
I think there are some fantastic doctors. The problem is people can't get appointments to see them.
Can I say I think the answer is yes. This is about underfunding, and actually there is a conspiracy of silence between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. They both recognise that the NHS and more widely is in crisis, but they're not putting the sums of money, not even nearly, that is needed. And we're hearing that from the Nuffield Trust, and we're hearing that from the BMA. We're hearing it from everyone. And actually,
so what would the Greens
be
the Green
Party are really clear. We need about £50 to £70 billion for the National Health Service. Now, that's a big sum of money because it's a big problem. But as a politician, the Green Party are going to be straight with people about that. We could have a wealth tax taxing multimillionaires and billionaires, just 1% on assets of over £10 million or more, or 2% on assets of £1 billion or more, along with other tax like bringing in capital gains tax in line with income tax. So we're taxing unearned wealth as much as earned wealth. It's these kind of measures that ultimately need to go. Because yes, it's not just a funding problem, but until you have the funding and until you have the capacity, you can move everything that you want, but it's not going to work. And by the way, I said this to Wes Streeting yesterday, and I accused him of privatising the NHS. He said the left were bleating on again. Our NHS needs to stay free at the point of use.
Yeah, but who's...
And the thing is, this is the classic response from someone like Wesley Streeting, right? He's obviously not going to respond in earnest to the accusation that he wants to increase the role of the private sector in the NHS, because he's been clear. He's been straight up clear that he wants to go further than Tony Blair.
Shut up, Wesley.
Those are his own words, right? About the increasing use of privatisation within the NHS. So he's not going to actually respond in earnest, in good faith, to Zach Polanski accusing him of doing the things that he says he's going to do, because he knows it's true. All he has to do, because the left broadly as a political force in this country have been browbeaten by the media smear campaign broadly against us from the Corbyn years up until now within the Green Party as well. So a bunch of kind of brain-broken liberals just treat us as being unserious people regardless of whether or not our actual ideas have any utility or not. So he doesn't need to, in the eyes of liberals, in the eyes of our liberal journalists, he doesn't need to say anything other than just, lol, aren't the left stupid and idiotic, privatise the NHS. I know I said I'd do it, but yeah, lefties always talk about that stuff. And I'm just like, yeah, because you're going to do it. The Reform UK and the Labour Party plans for dealing with the crisis in the NHS is essentially just, We are opening up all of this money from the state to be able to give to the private sector because we don't want to spend this money ourselves. We want to encourage a bunch of private investment so that we increase the private sector capacity so that we can use it by saying, oh, free government money available if you do it, right? It's cheaper than loads amount of capital investment, but it's essentially just the same kind of PFI style massaging of government funding to be able to increase public sector capacity using the private sector, and he's being called out for it. But this is more complex than a lot of people want to be able to internalise, which is just say Labour are privatising the NHS, which is basically broadly true. He doesn't want to engage with that point because he knows that it's true. So he just says, I just can't deal with lefties, lefties bleating on again. Because they have internalised contempt for the left, which is now being used by the media to spread throughout the country as well. But good on Zach for calling him out.
Saying it shouldn't.
The Labour Party, they're saying they will open their arms to privatisation.
Hang on. Who is saying? They haven't said that.
Wes Streeting has said they will open their arms to privatisation, warmly open the doors to privatisation.
But that is not what they've said is more private sector involvement, which has been there for quite some time. That is different, but that is different to charging people accessing.
But that's not what he means.
I'm actually very right-wing, and I loved it.
He said privatising the NHS or increasing the level of privatisation within the NHS. None of this necessarily means anything other than free at the point of use. In fact, Wes Streeting has been very clear. He keeps saying, oh, we definitely want it to be free at the point of need. And I'm just like, unfunded by general taxation. Well, that doesn't mean that we are using PFI, that we're not using PFIs. That doesn't mean that we're not using PFIs. That doesn't mean that we're not subcontracting out the running of these services to private companies who are then still taking their little share out in profit and dividends and CEO payments, for example. All these extra inefficiencies are baked in to a private sector contract, again delivered with no mandate towards actually delivering a good product because it's being done by contract rather than being done by the market. This is why we decommodify it entirely. It's why we want it to have an entirely public service, because at least it's democratically accountable rather than accountable to whichever government contractors they're available for them.
For sure, but it's a route to it. So the PFI contract,
it's a route to it.
£2 million on PFI.
The Labour Party set up the NHS, and the principle of it being free.
Yeah, the Labour Party set up the NHS, whatever. Like, Metallica invented, like, the kind of modern sound for heavy metal. It doesn't mean they're not shit.
At the point of use is something that's fundamental to the Labour Party. We want people to be able to get GP appointments, which is why we would train 6,000 more GPs. We would end the 8 a.m. scramble by updating the app so people can book appointments online and change their appointments online.
And you think we should change it?
Well, what we have here is a kind of
and she's just allowed to just say, oh, well, I know we're not going to mention the private involvement in terms of subcontracting, but we believe in funded by general taxation, free at the point of need, and that doesn't preclude you from using PFIs and private sector subcontracting, which is the literal accusation rightly being made by Zach Polanski. And then Joe Coburn has just backed up Labour and tried to shout him down, along with the Tories sitting to her right. Crazy stuff, just getting ganged upon 4-on-1 on the very real and genuine and evidenced claim that Labour are going to increase private sector involvement within NHS services. It's crazy.
Quadratic equation that can't be solved with those parameters, right? The Labour Party has said they're not going to do massive tax rises, they're not going to spend a huge amount more. They're talking a lot about reform, but they're not really talking about what that is. Joe, you mentioned free at the point of use. That's something that maybe should be discussed. It's this sacred cow in the UK. I'm almost hiding under the table when.
Ah, yes, indeed. The posh journalist getting paid money from Paul Marshall to spout shit for unheard. Oh, he really wants to discuss actually changing it so that the funding model of the NHS is no longer the Beveridge model. How quaint that the man who can afford to go private because he gets paid money hand over fist to be a privileged and pompous journalist. Suddenly these people want to talk about privatising the NHS. Very interesting how that's not an opinion shared with 90% of the public in it. Right, Katana, how you doing? Lazarick can't drum to save his life. I mean, true, he can't, yeah. No, they did not. That was British heavy metal. And that one, British heavy metal, is like a different brand of like the modern version of heavy metal that we see, right? Most modern heavy metal, it's inspired by the kind of sound that you got from Metallica, like the thrash metal period inspired most modern metal in a way that, you know, the classic metal bands from the UK like Black Sabbath didn't really influence current modern metal sound, even if they did influence Metallica initially. Sorry. We'll go back to politics now.
Before mentioning it, but I'm half Swedish. Sweden is a welfare state country. It has a higher tax take than we do. The health system is incredible. I've just been there and I can tell you it's paradise compared to what we have. And what they do is they charge a very small amount for people to visit a GP, around £20, and there's special provision made for people who really can't afford it. And you know what? It cuts out a lot of time wasters and it helps the system. Those kind of outside the box ideas is what we need to really think about if we're going to solve this problem.
Is there political...
It doesn't change anything. It literally doesn't. It doesn't matter where the funding comes from. That just changes who pays. That doesn't change the internal efficiency of the system at all, regardless. Again, this is what's so frustrating, is people say, well, what if we change the funding model? That will change how service is delivered. No, it really doesn't. It really does not change the service delivery. It just changes who bears more of the costs. And at the moment, less of the cost is borne by those who have less means because we pay for it by general taxation. Why do these posh dicks always forget the NHS was the best system in the world 14 years ago? I know, right? Yeah, like, they always seem to forget that when we had actual money going in, to be fair, lots of it was PFI money. And I think there's a question in chat from NWA talking about, like, did that help bring down waiting lists, the PFI stuff? And when it did, initially, but that's a cost that's being borne by future taxpayers. PFIs having to get paid off less efficiently, but with a bigger injection of cash now, is essentially buying votes now at the expense of votes later by essentially foregoing having to deal with who has to deal with the future debt payment. Because it's not like ephemeral debt, like public debt is. Private debt is very, very real debt, toxic debt we continue to pay. Exactly, very short term indeed. And sure, it may have got our healthcare service to the best in the world by 2010. It's true, we did have the best healthcare service in the world in 2010. That's undeniable. But that's the expense of having to pay off all of those contracts now, where we could have just used public money. It just would have meant the potentially, not even definitely, but potentially, the middle class people who kept voting for Tony Blair might have had slightly higher mortgage rates, and therefore they might have defected to another party. That's the problem, is Blair's voting coalition, the Blair voting coalition, was built upon the fact that they had continually appreciating house prices, which they wouldn't have done if interest rates had theoretically gone up because Blair had spent public money rather than private money on NHS investment.
Support for that?
No, they're not out of the box ideas. They're dangerous ideas that would restrict access to primary care for some of the most vulnerable people who have got comorbidities, who need to be able to see their doctor or a primary care professional without worrying about what it's going to cost them. I would just caution against the simplicity here. You know, Labour talking today about bringing back the family doctor. Did it ever go away? For many young people, they don't want the family doctor. They don't want to see the same person every time. They're perfectly happy with telemedicine. We must get away from these simplistic answers. And the other thing is, you know, this stuff today about locums, you know, the locum story and the family doctor story are obviously completely linked, because if you want a continuity of care, which the Health Select Committee said in its general practice report was very important, and you have better outcomes for over 75s who have continuity of care between the same GP, then you need more salary GPs. You don't need more locum GPs who may be there one day and maybe not there the next.
Right. Ellie?
Okay, whose fault is that? Mr. Tory, been in power for 14 years, oversaw the public sector pay freeze. Whose fault is that? They were having to go through the private sector through locum rather than having salary GPs. Whose fault's that?
Well, I think this issue around the family doctor and being able to get face-to-face appointments. Well, people that want a face-to-face appointment should be able to get one. And I appreciate not everyone does want a face, and that's fine. They can have a telephone appointment, but a lot of people do want that face-to-face appointment. But also the thing about the family doctor, seeing the same doctor, is actually really helpful if someone's got complex health needs, not having to go through all of their medical history every time they go to the GP, and that's been lost.
That's going to cost money that is not showing up in your spending plans. I mean, that's the big mystery here. You're talking about additional appointments, bringing back the family doctor, saving the NHS. That phrase has come up again, and yet there's no indication of where you're going to get the money from.
And what I mean,
it's capital investment. It can come from fiscal expansion. But again, this is a hole that Labour have dug themselves into. You cannot make the argument for fiscal expansion for capital investment if your entire election campaign has been predicated very specifically on the idea of the government's budget being run like a household. So they have cornered themselves into never being able to make any arguments in favour of fiscal expansion for capital investment. They can't do it.
By simplicity, it's simplistic answers. You know, the Liberal Democrats are talking about, you know, this guaranteed right to see a GP within, I think it's 24 hours or something. That is just utter nonsense, right? Because there are many times when you don't need to see a GP. Other primary care professionals will more than suffice.
But would you say pharmacies are equipped to deal with it? Because they're already dealing themselves with quite a lot of
pharmacists are medicine professionals.
Sure.
Right? And they are highly trained primary care professionals.
Oh, I'm not saying they're not
said that we trust them to do these 7 common conditions, from sore throat to impetigo, and you know, the Conservative manifesto talks about increasing the number of these conditions, and I think the Labour Party would do the same. There's a 20-fold increase in the spend on primary care that the government are promising in its manifesto, and that on pharmacy first. That has to be right. That's about using the wider capacity in primary care, but there's no replacement.
Understand what I said before about expanding the fiscal rule to 10 years. So the first fiscal rule is only using borrowing to play for capital investment, which is funny because, like, they say that they can do it within the fiscal rules, yet they aren't doing it because they don't think the public will vote for them if they say they're going to do it, which is very funny because they keep trotting out household budget style economics, right? But the second fiscal rule is that at the end of the 5th year, debt has to be falling as a projected share of GDP at that period. So they need to get enough growth through investment, if they do borrow to invest, to make sure that after the end of that 5-year period, debt is falling as a percentage of GDP. But John McDonnell was making the point that, well, actually, we probably can't get growth that quickly because it would take a long time to be seen throughout the economy. We want to invest in the future, rebuild Britain, for the many, not the few. But that will take more than 5 years to do enough investment to then see those returns to get big enough growth that debt can be projected falling at the end of 10 years. Which gives them way more leeway with how much initial investment they can do through fiscal expansion into all of the crazy amounts of capital investment that they actually do need to do in education, in healthcare, in council houses, in councils themselves, right? Like, all of these things are justified in expanding into. And, of course, interest rates are coming down, projected to over the next few months, which means bond yields are likely to come down too. So borrowing is going to be actually much cheaper than we expected. Historically, it's kind of a normal price, what we were doing throughout the entirety of the 60s on capital investment. And we should be doing this again throughout the entirety of the public sector realm to rebuild after the austerity nightmare. But Labour aren't going to do it because they can't, because if they do too much of it, they therefore would break their fiscal rule of debt falling after 5 years. But even then, outside of that, they don't want to do the capital investment anyway, or even promise to do it, because they think the voters will hate it because they treat the government's budget like a household budget. And also they think that if they got into power and they did capital investment they'd not promised, the press would savage them for going back on their promises, which is true. So again, we've just been locked into this future where we don't get out of the morass. We don't get out of the malaise.
for an actual GP for people who have comorbidities and need that continuity of care, because as Ellie says, they see you come in and they remember when dad had X and dad started presenting with Y, and they then can join the dots on your family care. That's what a family doctor.
Let me just get a final word from Camilla Hawthorne. I mean, Camilla, do you think it's going to improve, whoever wins the election, do you think the situation is going to radically transform?
It won't transform overnight. It's encouraging to hear people redirecting billions of pounds into primary care. And we know it's a more cost-effective way of preventing people from needing to be admitted to hospital where care is expensive and at the moment is overwhelmed. I do worry. I think if you look at other systems, and the King's Fund has been looking at this, really our system is no worse than other systems. It's just under-resourced. That's the problem. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I would say as well that, you know, in general practice, we're seeing 360 million plus cases a year in a population of 60 million. So if you do the sums, that's 6 appointments per person per year. Some people are taking more, some people are taking less. We clearly need more. We've got an ageing, sicker population. So we clearly need more, and we need to be working not just on recruiting these fabulous 6,000 additional GPs who haven't appeared and were promised some years ago, but also retaining them. How do we keep people in practice?
Professor Hawthorne, thank you very much for joining us for that discussion. Now, we have, of course, Zach Polanski here, Deputy Leader of the Green Party. And Zach, you may have heard the leading think tank, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, accusing smaller parties, including the Greens, of using their proposals, you outlined some of them in terms of the funding for the NHS that you would support in higher taxes across the board. But Paul Johnson, who is the director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, said that your proposals are poisoning the political debate. Let's have a listen.
I want to spend a little time, though, on Reform UK and the Greens. They offer much bigger numbers, very exciting, radical policies. Of course, they're not going to be implemented because they're not going to form the government. But I would suggest that the way that they suggest that their radical reforms can realistically make a positive difference, when in fact what they propose is wholly unattainable, does help to actually to poison the political debate.
Well, that's quite an accusation. Do you agree, first of all, that your proposals are wholly unattainable?
I mean, you might as well have played the bit where we actually talked the real criticism. Because all this is essentially, far right and far left are all the same with stupid ideas that don't make sense. Right? Actually, how about we listen to what Paul Johnson had to say, what his actual structural critique was with the plans? That might give us more of an idea of what's wrong with them, rather than just, can't trust a small party.
No, I don't, surprisingly. I also think it's absurd to put Reform and Greens in the same place. Reform's anti-migrant, anti-net zero, and Greens are the opposite of all.
Let's focus on what you are proposing, because he was very specific, proposes an extra, in the rest of his speech, an extra £145 billion in day-to-day spending compared to £5 billion for Labour, £17 billion on tax cuts from the Conservatives. It is wholly unattainable.
Well, actually, BBC Verify said that our economic manifesto is economically credible, and also we've worked with the Wealth Tax Commission and University of Greenwich on their modelling. But more widely, I think, if you look at the Office of Budget Responsibility, a few years ago they did a report around the climate crisis, and actually a lot of the solutions they were suggesting around the taxation we're asking for, and crucially the borrowing, is very similar to our plans. Ultimately, this is about what is the level of ambition, and if you borrow to pay for unfunded tax cuts like Liz Truss did, that will crash the economy. But if you borrow for capital investment to get our country moving and ultimately invest in the future of tackling the climate crisis and getting an economy moving, then that's exactly the right way to go. That's real hope and real change, and that's what the Green Party is offering.
I've got to say, and that's exactly right. That's exactly right. The reason why it's different, I think it's worth pointing out the mechanics of why these things are different, especially in the UK's economy. Well, we're not an investment economy. We're a rentier economy, an asset economy, which that's woolly phrases, but I think it gets the picture across. When Liz Truss had her predictions about what her tax cuts would do, she was going for growth by saying, well, look, people can't spend enough money in our economy. If we give them tax cuts, they'll spend that. It will generate economic activity. That will grow the economy. Laffer curve will mean that we'll end up not necessarily losing as much tax as we thought we would, and the growth will help stimulate there to be more commodities being bought and sold, which is going to be better in the long run. That's not going to happen if you give rich people tax cuts in the UK. There isn't much to be gained from them risking their newfound capital to invest that in, say, for example, new startup businesses to be able to create more commodities be bought and sold. What it would probably do most likely would do is they would use that extra liquidity or that extra capital, they would pour it into the asset economy that already exists because it's a guaranteed return, especially with something like property or financial instruments, which the government already tries to protect them, maintain the value of, and to see them increase overall, because important people, i.e. people who donate to political parties and middle-class swing voters, and pension funds, who are also swing voters as well, the people who have their money invested in pension funds, need financial instruments to increase in value because that reflects the value of their pension, and needs their property to go up in value. So governments will always run policy that protects these interests. So it's much more a guaranteed return of new capital that's in the hands of rich people, which is what Liz Truss did, tax cuts for the rich, that they're just going to put that liquidity into existing asset prices, make it more expensive to increase their overall net worth. It wasn't going to create more economic activity. That was the big failure of the Liz Truss paradigm on why they would get growth. If you borrow for capital investment, you are taking that money that you can maybe think that they might capital invest in the private sector, which obviously I would argue wouldn't happen. We don't know because Liz Truss had no projections, no nothing, no oversight from the Office of Budget Responsibility, for example, which is why the markets got spooked. There was no plan as to the kind of growth they thought they were going to be able to get to pay for the tax cuts and pay for the extra borrowing, which was what the tax cuts were coming from. They were increasing fiscal expansion to be able to cut those taxes. That's why the markets fell out of favour. Yet if you can guarantee this extra money is going into investment, it is going into increasing on the supply side, which is what capital investment is. If you invest in new green technology, that's new jobs, that's new supply, that will also bring down the supply-demand curve with that increased supply, which means that it might probably unlikely to be inflationary, and will also generate value for the state. The state gains assets, which counteracts the liabilities that you get from increasing that debt, which is going to net overall, as long as you're appreciating in value more than the interest you pay on that debt. That means that gives the markets confidence in what you're doing with the money that you're borrowing. This is the difference between investing money in capital investment and using borrowing for tax cuts. These are why these things are different, and that's the mechanics of it. Because you can just say, oh, well, capital investments are different to tax cuts, but it doesn't let people know. This is the very big difference in why these two things. This is why these two things are so different. Again, if we had a more investment-led economy, where rich people can make the most out of their money by taking that and investing into the supply side themselves, maybe Liz Truss might have had a better time. But that's not what you get in neoliberal Britain, because assets are worth more than investment at this point, and they have been for a very long time.
What Paul Johnson there says, to me, is the worst of kind of policing the Overton window. If anything poisons the political debate, it's kind of pouring scorn on smaller parties who are actually having some interesting ideas. Now, I'm not going to say that the Green Party manifesto stacks up economically, nor reform, but at least there's some interest there. And frankly, in this very kind of uninteresting general election, some of the ideas that are actually worth paying attention to are coming from reform and from the Greens. And I think that makes it a more healthy debate. So for him to stand there and basically insist on orthodoxy, which is what his role seems to be, we've tried that for decades. It hasn't worked.
Right. Steve, is it poisoning the...
Yeah, I agreed with the unheard guy there, and he is right. Again, my criticisms of Reform UK have never ever been, I think they're going to crash the economy with their balmy plans for tax cuts, whatever. What I have done is say the vision that this promotes is one of inequality and is one of reducing the power of workers within the economy, creating a Singapore-on-Thames style, whatever. Like, that's been my criticism. I think it's bad for workers and bad for the poor, not that it is fiscally not credible. With most of these manifestos, which are of parties that are unlikely to get into government, it's mood music about their priorities, rather than a plan for what they're going to do, because they're not going to get into government. It's right that they can be more bold when they have no realistic prospect of having to put these things into action, and I think that's true as a criticism. But the idea that, well, the problem with the Green Party's plan is they say they're going to invest all this money from taxation into the NHS to day-to-day spending, for example. But if they spend all this money and they don't get the taxation money, that's going to crash the economy. I think, well, what's more likely to happen is that if they don't get the extra tax revenue that they predict that they will from their capital gains changes, from their national insurance changes, from their wealth tax, all that will lead into is less investment in the NHS in retrospect, rather than this gigantic economic crash that all of these centre-right neoliberal technocrats scaremongering that would actually happen. But what you need to know is what these people's priorities are when it comes to a manifesto of a party that's not likely to get into government. And that's fine for both Reform and the Greens. Again, I think Reform is bad because I think that their vision is bad. I think their values are bad. I think the plans that they have in ideological terms are ones that I think would be worse for people I care about. Not that I think that they are fiscally not credible, because you can't make those claims about somebody who doesn't have any realistic plan to get into government.
Political debate, the sort of proposals that we've heard from Zach?
Well, I mean, what they're doing, of course, is framing the choice between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, because they're the only two that are going to enter Downing Street next Friday.
Thanks for making the UK politics shit show a little easier to bear. Your answer, my rage, emotional support.
Appreciate that. Well, Canty for Demon. Thank you for the year. Thank you for the year of subscribing on Twitch. Thank you very much for the support. Appreciate you. And remember, if you're watching at home and you're enjoying my content, you can support the stream by subscribing on Twitch for $4.99 or for free with Twitch Prime by linking your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account for a free Twitch subscription every single month. Get you access to ad-free viewing and my animated and static emotes in Twitch chat. You can also drop bits on Twitch if you want to have a message read out. 100 bits gets you text-to-speech. Over on YouTube, you can have a message read out by super chatting. I read out all super chats regardless of value. Memberships on YouTube, which are only 99p cheaper than a can of Red Stripe, gets you access to my archive live streams. It gets you access to my static emotes in YouTube chat and in the YouTube comments section. But the best way to support the stream is to gift memberships on YouTube to your fellow viewers. It boosts the stream in the algorithm, shares the love around, and gets us more emote slots as well. So if you don't have a message you want read out, but you do want to contribute, it's always best to gift memberships rather than super chat. But of course, never expected, always appreciated. But if we can get some donos, that would be very much appreciated, as I have been away for a week. Someone gift a sub to Kath.
Morning. So there's that. I mean, I haven't read, your manifesto in great detail, but I do think we should call out some of the stuff in the smaller manifestos. I mean, we've got a climate emergency. Look at it out there. Look, the dangers that we've got in the Med right now, and we've got the leader of a mainstream political party who is polling some way just behind the Conservatives right now, saying that we should end net zero nonsense. We should crack down even tougher on immigration when we've got 152,000 vacancies in the care system. I don't get the joke with Nigel Farage. I call it out. I don't think it's funny. The man in the pub routine doesn't
he's not here,
laugh.
But, yeah.
And if he's here, he'd say, "Oh, well, of course, that's because Mr. Bryan doesn't get the new politics." You know what? I don't get his new politics, and I don't want it. And
I think that's fine, actually. I agree with the Tory guy here. Like, if we're going to criticise Farage, don't say that he is outside of the Overton window so you can ignore him. It is the plans that he has and the vision that he has are things that I think would be bad for the country. They are not fiscally credible. Again, the same kind of criticisms I have about vacancies and reducing migration, for example. Like, yeah, me and Steve Bryan clearly have very similar criticisms of Nigel Farage, like, if you could believe such a thing.
As the main party should call it out, because that poisons politics.
I think that's right, Steve. I think it's also important to say Reform have 8 councils.
Well,
the Green
as I
Party
say,
have 850.
They're not here, and you are. Let's focus on the Green. Yeah, we are. But let's focus on you and your position. In fact, we can show the general election voting intention for the Greens, unlike Reform, which has definitely increased in terms of people's voting intentions. Yours has been pretty static at 6%. Why?
Yes, so we've quadrupled our number of local councils in the last 4 years, but in a general election, the first past the post system is undoubtedly more difficult for us. However, we target
But the support's gone up for Reform. It's stayed the same for Greens.
Well, we target seats like Bristol, Brighton, North Herefordshire and Waveney Valley. This is places where we think we can get Green MPs. It's really clear that the Conservatives are toast. We will have a Labour government, but having Green MPs there will push that Labour government to be bigger, better and bolder. For instance, tomorrow, Carla Denyer, the co-leader of the Greens, will be out with the junior doctors on strike on the picket line. Ellie, will you join them?
Well, I wouldn't promote that, Zach. That's not a good thing.
People get pay
that's not a good
restoration.
thing.
And I think
let's just remind people what that is. 35% pay restoration. Yeah. And you'd fund that how?
See, they keep saying, oh, it's 35% pay restoration. yeah, it's £15 up to £21 an hour. I think that it should be fine that junior doctors get paid more than people who work in Pret-a-Manger in central London. I think that's a reasonable salary. As much as I think the people in Pret-a-Manger should be able to organise and earn as much as possible, based, they should do that, 100%. But I don't think it's unreasonable, even from a leftist perspective, to say that maybe we should be paying junior doctors more than people who work in Pret-a-Manger. Right? I mean, ideally, we should replace Pret-a-Manger with the Pound Bakery. Nod to Zach Polanski on Cross Question, and then we can force posh London middle-class people to eat some sausage rolls and some pasties rather than whatever the fuck Pret makes, because it's crazy expensive. But anyway, you know, I think that we need to ensure that there is a competitive market for junior doctors' salaries, internationally at the very least, as I mentioned earlier on. Interesting as well, as they say, oh, well, Reform UK's vote share has increased, but the Greens hasn't. It's because people on the liberal and left side of politics, at least as far as the Overton window is concerned, are very tactically voting pilled, right? Whereas actually, if you ask people who they would vote for if there was an equal chance of parties winning, Green Party are third on 19%. They drop 13 percentage points. According to this singular poll, of course, all of the caveats, they drop 13 percentage points just out of people not thinking that they can win because they're a small party, which is an artifact of first past the post. Whereas Reform UK voters are so incensed with rage at the Conservative Party, they don't care if Keir Starmer wins. I wonder why they aren't scared of a Keir Starmer premiership. Very weird, that, isn't it? So much so that they're happy to just vote Reform regardless, because they couldn't care less about whether the Tories win or not. Whereas we do. We really do care about who wins on the left and liberal and even the kind of centre ground of politics now. They just want the Tories out and will vote tactically to do so, and that really hurts small parties like the Greens. It's not that they're not popular, because we've seen the stats to show they are popular. They just have a voting base that is more tactically voting pilled than the right wings are. And on top of that, as Edward points out in chat too, there's a reason why Reform UK have a massive presence and the Greens don't, even though the Greens have way more councillors, like, you know, factors of 10 more councillors. That's because Farage and Richard Tice get paid megabucks by GB News and Talk TV to have their little promotional shows for Reform UK. Like, how many Green Party MPs or prospective MPs or members or councillors have got their own show on GB News called Richard Tice's Sunday Sermon? Yeah, they don't have any, do they? I wonder why. It's almost like that Reform UK have interests that align with those who own media companies, and the Green Party doesn't. Just a thought.
So this is going to be both from borrowing and also from the taxes I was talking about, making sure those with the broadest shoulders.
Borrowing and taxes. Steve's got his head in his hands.
Yeah.
Ellie, what about you?
I mean, I've looked at the last page of the Green Party manifesto where it sets out costings, and
thank you for the 10 gifted membership, Shazbab. Appreciate your support.
I think that under that, it's something like £82 billion worth of additional debt.
It's not far off what Jeremy Corbyn's Labour manifesto would have cost in 2019.
But also it's a lot less than Austria and France.
In that Liz Truss mini budget that crashed the economy, sent people's mortgages spiralling, I think there was something like 40 billion of additional debt. So, you know, there's these proposals, you know, over 80 billion additional debt would just absolutely crash our economy.
Again, borrowing for tax cuts is not the same as borrowing for capital investment. I have already explained this. But of course, in Labour world, we don't care about the narrative that's being spun. The Labour Party couldn't give a shit if they ferment neoliberal rhetorical consensus in the minds of the voting public. They just want to fight off the attacks from the left. And so they will happily say, we can never spend any money, the economy would crash. Borrowing for tax cuts is the same as borrowing for capital investment. We will shrink the Overton window as small as possible so that we maintain power forever whilst never changing the voting system. Please do not threaten our political hegemony. I hate these people. Again, somebody in my Twitter replies, describe the Labour Party as being the biggest barrier to progressive change, and they are 100% correct. And also, as Morinaka points out, we literally have decades of underinvestment. Like, this is the bare minimum to bring us back to where investment should have been had we not had a Conservative government doing fiscal contraction during a liquidity trap.
But your health spokesman, Wes Streeting, has said to the BMA, as regards junior doctor strikes, that he'll be on the phone on day one, is what he said. What do you think they will receive that as a message? Of course they're expecting a big pay rise. As soon as, finally, after 14 years, they're going to get a Labour government.
Should they get one? Wes has also said that he doesn't think these strikes should go ahead. He doesn't think that the current government is going to resolve it. And yes, one of the first calls that he would make on the 5th of July is that if he's lucky enough, if we are lucky enough to form a government, is to
he's going to talk
about get round the table, because that's how you
get round the table. Let's leave that. Let's just assume they're all round the table. What's the figure going?
It feels like they're all a step away from saying there is no magic money tree at all times. Well, literally, we had Super Tansky on Twitter. Super Tansky saying, well, we can't borrow now. The economy is in a mess. Let's sort out the economy and then we can spend some money. I'm like, no, sorting out the economy requires capital investment. You are literally repeating the lines of David Cameron and George Osborne by saying, well, we need to fix the roof while the sun is shining. Like, we need to fix the roof while the sun is shining. Like, this is literally what David Cameron and George Osborne said in the austerity period that destroyed this country. They've been so brain poisoned by the neoliberal consensus being trotted out by Labour Party apparatchiks, repeating it verbatim with no critical analysis of what any of these things actually fucking mean, to the point at which they just turn themselves into Cameron-era Conservatives without even knowing that they've done it. Because they don't have any critical thinking skills to be able to critically appraise what the Labour Party is telling them. They just hear the talking points handed down by Wes Streeting, Rachel Reeves, Bridget Phillipson, Shabana Mahmood, Pat McFadden, Steve Reed, all of the Labour together fucking gang of four, and they repeat it verbatim without even thinking about what they're saying. And it's like, yeah, we're just Cameronite Tories now. Incredible scenes from these people. Again, a basic level of economic literacy, of macroeconomic literacy, about basic tenets of Keynesian economics would make them know that the Labour Party was completely full of shit, or were just lying openly to the public about how macroeconomics works. But they never bothered studying it. They just think, oh, well, the red team is saying it, well, it must be correct. And then they repeat it verbatim, and it becomes political consensus. It becomes part of the political zeitgeist forever. It's insane. All of these, like, Labour, Liberal, red team sycophants just becoming Cameron-era Tories by absorbing Labour rhetoric and repeating it without any critical analysis of what's being said. Infuriating. Then again, that's how stupid you have to be a Labour Party apparatchik.
To be.
Yeah,
I mean, you've got to talk about money.
You know that I'm not going to carry out negotiations on TV, but getting round the table, having those conversations.
Yeah, but Zach, you're a pressure group in that sense, aren't you? You're a pressure group on this issue, aren't you? You're just going to try and pressurise if Labour wins the election.
Greens in Parliament, and in fact, Ellie could go and join those junior doctors on the picket line, but is refusing that. Right. But I think the important point here is the pandemic. We saw multimillionaires and billionaires get richer than they ever have, whilst our junior doctors and people in the NHS were out there working every single day. Well, of course they should be paid properly. I mean, the fact we're even having this conversation is that orthodoxy. A proper wage compared to...
define proper wage.
By taxing multimillionaires and billionaires to make sure that those people running a...
And again, just a wage that means they won't leave and go to Australia, or if they're, like, nurses who went to go and work in Tesco because it was more lucrative for them to do so, right? That's just basic stuff. It's basic stuff. That's pay restoration. Again, the 35% is not a pay rise, it is pay restoration to the same real terms pay they had in 2010 before the austerity period. That's what real pay means. That's what a proper pay rise means. That is the context that this strike is happening in. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just say it. Say you don't think doctors deserve £20 an hour. Say it. Say it to my fucking face. I really wish Zach would talk about the claps. Like, we don't need to give these people pay restoration for all the hard work they did during the pandemic. We paid them in claps. Claps now legal tender, chat. That's what it is, basically. We clapped you. You're not happy? Are you not entertained?
Country are paid properly, and when you say that's ridiculous, you put your head in your hands. 14 years of conservative austerity.
The reason my head is in my hands is because they want 35%. The government have said that's unaffordable, where Streeting has rightly said that is unaffordable. The government have offered
Isn't it only like 1.3 billion as well? Again, it's smaller than the amount of money they've spent stopping the strikes. Like, not all of the NHS budget is spent on junior doctors' salaries. You could easily just implement the capital gains tax changes that the Greens want you to be able to pay for the 2-child benefit cap and the junior doctors' pay disputes, whilst also having a bunch of money left over to do something else with as well. Like, it'd be absolutely fine to do that.
The government
they've had a pay cut over those.
The government have offered 9% plus 3%, so that's 12%. So somewhere between 12 and 35.
Yeah, so they're still not even at £18 an hour on your pay rise. They're still below £18 an hour and still lower in real terms pay than what they had in 2010. That's why it's pay restoration.
Is where the deal lies, right? So if you're picking up the phone on day one, what's your gambit? Where do you start from? Because it's somewhere between 12 and 35. Anything over 12 costs more than is currently in the
But the Conservatives have obviously failed completely to resolve these strikes.
Yep, and I don't think that the BMA Junior Doctors Committee has any intention of settling with a Conservative government. They have settled with an SNP government and a Labour government in Wales.
At least we're getting a policy. He says wants to raise taxes and pay them a lot more.
But hang on,
coherent.
To what? Right.
So neither of these parties, and particularly the Labour Party, which we're expecting to lead, are admitting, what are you going to do? There's nothing in the manifesto to pay doctors more. You're saying you're not going to borrow more. You're not going to raise taxes. How are you going to do it?
Right. Can I just come... Yeah, well, how are you going to do it?
But last time Labour were in government, we didn't see the strikes like we've seen at the moment.
Yeah, but you are going to have to resolve this one.
Yes. And I'm confident that Wes Streeting will be able to do that if we're privileged.
Literally, when they were asked about the strike action in like the meeting with the NHS students, they couldn't even say pay. Oh, well, the first thing we need is respect. They keep saying this line, oh, well, the first thing doctors need is respect. No, they need money. And it's not just they need money because they want to get money because they're greedy or whatever, whatever. You can impugn the motives of them wanting to get paid more as much as you want. I'm not going to get into that conversation. But in terms of the future of the NHS, the recruitment and retention crisis in our staffing sector in the NHS is broadly around pay. Because this is how markets work. If somebody can get offered better pay elsewhere, whether it's in a different sector or in the same sector in another country, they'll just go. They'll just go, right? The market is telling you are not paying these people enough. You'd have thought the neoliberal, people who currently staff the halls of the uni party of the Tories and Labour at the moment would understand how market dynamics work. This is the future of the NHS is at stake, which is why we should have resolved these things ages ago. That's the real problem here. And that will require not just respect, not just getting around the table. It will require actual cold, hard cash. And again, a capital gains tax rise to pay for a pay rise for doctors, taking away from people accruing value off their share portfolio, contributing literally nothing to society by making money off of investment rather than being productive, and spending that on some of those productive people in our society, the most useful people in our society, the most critical people to having a functioning society, which is doctors. I know it seems like a fair trade-off to me. I don't know about you, chat.
But it's going to cost him money.
Complacency as well about the outcome of this election either.
Right. I mean, you say, Zach, just briefly, the money will be raised by taxing, in particular, the rich. Who do you count as the rich?
So before I was saying assets of over £10 million or more, 1%.
Not your policies in the manifesto.
National insurance. So we're also talking about people earning over £55,000 a year, giving £5 a week.
That makes you rich.
We have to talk about what that's offset by. That's offset by cheaper public transport, not having to use privatised healthcare, making sure there's a council house available. Ultimately, this isn't just about the tax. It's about
some teachers and police sergeants could pay £300 or more extra in taxes.
When I talk to people, £5 a week, those same people would be very happy to do that if it meant that we had public services that ran properly. There's a sense this country is broken. It's these two parties who have broken it together in this orthodoxy, and the Green Party are offering real hope and real change.
Do you think that...
Yeah, why should people who earn £55,000 a year or more pay a lower percentage of their income in national insurance than people who earn less than them? Why? Why should they do that? That doesn't make any sense at all.
Will be attractive in terms of raising taxes?
I think the reason the reform line has been inching upwards on the chart we just saw on the screen and the green line has been remaining flat is that people don't really like the idea of massive new tax hikes.
I don't think £5 a week's a massive new tax hike.
Right, I'm just going...
And also, again, that's just not true. Again, people would happily vote for the Greens if they thought that they could win, but it's the tactical voting problem that's the barrier here, really and truly. Again, this is before Reform UK jumped in how much they were polling. So if we take the polling average of Reform as being about 15 points, add on 25, make it 20, they're on a similar number of percentage points as what I reckon if this poll would be done now, because this was all from August 2023, the Reform UK would potentially get in the future. So, I mean, this is an inexact science and it's one poll, but what it clearly demonstrates is that there is appetite for the Greens platform and the Greens policies. There just isn't an appetite for splitting the vote on the progressive side, whereas there is on the right. And of course, all of the things we said about the platforms that they get by sharing the interests of the media companies.
To show you the proxy vote registration deadline here. 5 p.m. today, not long to register to vote by proxy, and you must also be registered to vote. So make sure you gallop down and get that all sorted out before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Just briefly, do you think leadership is important when it comes to setting the tone and example to and on green policies?
Yeah, I think it's very important.
So why is it that Carla Denyer, the co-leader, has said that she's still got her gas boiler, but she's got quotes for a heat pump in her email inbox? Lots of people out.
This was crazy, right? This is absolutely crazy. There was on a TikTok one time. It went viral going, haha, look how much of a hypocrite she is, right? A Labour parliamentary candidate, was an MP, is now a parliamentary candidate. Literally, right? He tweeted out this shit. I've had an air source heat pump for 13 years, installed before 4 general elections, indeed before I was in politics. Think that makes me greener than the Greens? Remember, this guy is like 61, right? He's 61. He's been an MP for 14 years on the equivalent of 91k a year, inflation adjusted, right? On top of that, he says he got this before he was in politics. Can you guess what he was doing before he was in politics, chat? This guy was a finance manager at fucking Peugeot. This guy was, raking it in, making money hand over fist. He's a home owner, and he's 61 years old, right? And Carla Denyer is a renter who's 38, who doesn't have the luxury of being a senior finance manager at Peugeot, followed by being a handsomely paid member of parliament. Yeah, it's really difficult, A, to afford a heat pump before the age of 38, B, to afford a mortgage before the age of 38. So if you want a heat pump, you're going to have to ask a fucking landlord. That's the landlord's fault, not her fault if she's a renter. What's crazy is this idea that renters just seem to get forgotten in how we do our politics. Oh, I can't believe you're not got a heat pump installed. Ask the portfolio mum and pop landlord that people rent off of. That's their fault. It's not the fault of the renters who don't choose the kind of boiler that's in their household. Jesus. But, it just turns out that the party of working people is far more concerned with attacking renters instead of actually thinking about, well, maybe the moral of this story is the government should be subsidising installation of heat pumps for people who can't afford it and legislating landlords to get them to do it. Because renters don't have the choices and loads of other people can't even afford it, even those who do have mortgages. Of course, senior finance managers at Peugeot, they can definitely afford that shit. Incredible. Blaming renters for generational red tape cutting. Yeah, exactly. Crazy that this became a story. Absolutely crazy. Just shows you what Labour politicians are fucking like. Scumbags, a lot of them. Also, yeah, what's the fucking dog pile on the Greens Day, apparently?
They'll say, well, if she can't be bothered to actually install a heat pump and get rid of her gas boiler, why should we?
Can she not be bothered, or is it about affordability and is it about capacity in someone to actually install it? This isn't about individuals. This is about systemic change, and that needs to come from big business and ultimately from government legislating.
So leadership, you don't need to lead by example.
You can do both. So I have the power and privilege that I don't drive, I'm vegan, and I don't fly. But ultimately, those are individual choices I've made because I can afford them and because I have the space to do them. That's not what the Green Party is about. You can eat meat, you can drive, and you can fly. This is about ultimately saying we need that system change, and ultimately the greenest, cleanest option should always be the cheapest. It's really important that people don't think this is about individual responsibility. This is about systemic change.
Careful what you wish.
My God. Chat, break glass in case of material analysis. Break glass in case of material analysis. Material analysis. There you go. Break glass in case of material analysis. What, the whole of our economy isn't just individuals bumbling around making individual choices in a vacuum. No, there are systems and modalities and patterns of human behaviour that we can actively change and shape through government policy. Incredible. Somebody has said such a groundbreaking piece of political economy on a flagship TV politics discussion show. Crazy. Absolutely crazy shit. And again, on top of that, she's a fucking renter. Blame the landlord.
wish for, because you look across Europe and those kind of policies have just become incredibly unpopular. It's leading to revolts. People are making protests on the streets. We've seen this huge backlash in the European elections, and actually green policies trying to force people to spend money they don't feel they have on top-down measures that they're not.
But we want to subsidise it. We don't want them to spend the money. We want to subsidise it. And on top of that, sure, it may be being less popular amongst Europe, still popular in the UK. It's more popular in the UK than it is in Germany, in loads of other countries, in France, even the United States as well. We're one of the most positive countries towards green policy. Just saying all the Europeans don't like it. Well, we still do like it. We still want it.
Not sure are going to be effective is proving incredibly unpopular. So careful what you wish for.
So where I agree is we're experiencing wildfires and floods, and these shouldn't be top-down measures. They should be measures made with communities, and I agree we've all got to get better at that.
All right, let's have a look at this headline. BBC News, Braverman, that's Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, still has 24/7 security due to threats. There is a documentary, BBC Radio 4's The Deadly Business of Democracy. It's now available to listen to on BBC Sounds. Let's have a listen to a couple of the clips. One of them is from Suella Braverman and another from the Labour politician Naz Shah.
We all feel passionate about things. It's not an excuse for violence. It's not an excuse to tell someone you're going to kill them or rape them or kill their child.
I mean, clearly they forgot to add in Minecraft at the end. I'm sorry, Chad. This is a serious subject. I'm just giving you shit about Suella Braverman.
My eldest, she was only 13 at the time when I got my first ever death threat. The police rang me up and said, "Oh, where are you? We've just intercepted a threat to shoot you." And at that point, I did sit my daughter down, saying, "Look, if anything happens to me, you remember your mother was doing the right thing." Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not a conversation you should have with a 13-year-old.
Do you recognise those sorts of threats? I mean, they're awful. I mean, is this...
I mean, true, it is very funny how state violence is completely ignored, but individual acts of violence directed at politicians, which should be condemned, obviously, in forthright, we should be condemned threats of violence against politicians, but state violence, social murder, nothing we can do, right? Statecraft, dodgy business. It's true, like, again, she's very passionate about the actions of the IOF, isn't she?
Common, that level of threat. I know abuse generally, but that level of threat against MPs.
I've heard a number of stories of MPs facing the sorts of threats that Naz has spoken about that, and I don't think we should forget that two much loved MPs have been murdered in recent years, loved by both sides of the House. It's a very real issue.
Steve?
Yeah, don't separate out abuse from threats that become other things. I would just say that
Fair enough.
I took a zero tolerance, habits die hard, took a zero tolerance approach. I always remember when I was first elected, there was this chap who would email me with the most rude, vile, abusive emails, and I used to call him the Wizard of Oz because I saw him at an event, and he was this very tiny, frail old man, but when he got behind his email, he used to send me these abusive emails, and he was so terribly charming to me in person, but I took a zero tolerance approach to replies to him because I thought, well, you have to call this out, because if you let it be okay in the virtual world, then eventually it spills over. And, it's vile, and it isn't just women. There are plenty of men that get it too. And, I'm not going to give the credibility to people, even in a place like Winchester. I had multiple threats over the years. I'm not going to give the credibility to describing them because they don't deserve that. But, we do this job because we...
Okay, don't give a shit about your sob stories, mate. That was fun. Somebody stitch me on TikTok. I wonder what they have to say. So, what is this stitch that someone's done? Let's have a listen and see what they've said. Yeah, where does Frank Hester fit in? Yeah, exactly. Hopefully, this idea that we're going to do welfare reforms because there's too many people scrounging benefits.
Hello, everybody. Now, please, for context, go and watch the video that I'm stitching to, because it's about the Tories' attitude towards the benefit system and a lot of older people's attitude towards the benefit system. A lot of it based to a certain degree on a bit of BS and propaganda from the right, i.e. everybody's a scrounger. Now, what I'm about to say is my personal experience of being on benefits, all right? Okay, and my history of being on benefits. Now, I have now, up until a couple of years ago, I'd worked since I was 21. Okay, most of that time, full-time hours, right? Which, well, full-time for the job I was in, which was 35 and a half hours. I know there's certain firms that is borderline part-time, but I weren't working for them firms, so if you want to whine about that, whatever. Okay. Now, the company I worked for was House of Fraser, the department store group. I can say that now because I no longer work for them. And that's going to come out later. When they went into administration, they were taken over by Sports Direct. And if you're British, your reaction will probably be the same as anybody who I mention that name to. Yeah, especially when they're talking about their employment. Well, anyway, they have this thing where they never have people, apart from management and supervisors, they don't have anything full-time hours. So, after they'd owned the company for a few years, and they got through COVID and all this, they started doing what was known colloquially as firing and rehire. I.e., what they would do is they'd make you redundant and bring you in on a contract that is worse than what you started off with. Now, some firms do this, and they might knock a few allowances off, or they might cut a few hours from your money, or bonuses, or stuff that's in there. Sports Direct cut us all from working contracted hours, in my case, 35 and a half a week, to what they call casual work agreement, which is their way of calling it a 0-hour contract. Which meant, that meant that my hours went down from 35 and a half hours a week, which is livable. I mean, I weren't never going to retire to the south of France, but, you know, I wasn't, how can I put this? I wasn't quite on the breadline. I wasn't quite using food banks and using, shall we say, the, you know, on the verge of being kicked out. Because luckily I'm in a council flat, so it's not that bad. When I came back, after my couple of weeks, the week and 2 weeks holiday I had because I weren't sure I wanted to come back, but, you know, I had to start looking for another job and applying for stuff. My average hours was 16 hours a week. Sometimes 20, 25, sometimes as low as 12. You know, that was barely livable. That meant I lost out on about 400 or 500 quid a month. Sometimes as much as nearly 700, 800 pound a month. Cutting hours, massive when you're on a low-paid minimum wage job. Okay, so that meant that to pay my bills, to pay my rent, to pay my council tax, to pay anything, I had to go on universal credit. Now here's the thing, that is based on your last take-home pay. Now, because of the way, as I say, on 0-hour contracts, and it's not the same amount of money as you would earn anyway, you are given an allowance. Then anything over that allowance, money taken over that allowance, you get to keep 45% of it. Right, of your council tax money, I should say. Of your, your universal credit money, my apologies. Which basically means that for every £100 you earn over that allowance, you get 45% of your universal credit, up until a limit. Okay. That meant my average award on UC was around £200. Sometimes, because, say, doing certain hours, if I earned over about 1,300, 1,400, which is still a lot less than what I was getting on paid, I would get nothing. And there was a lot of months where I had 0 award. But I'm still technically part of the people on the welfare. All right? That was up until Christmas this year, when, and after Christmas, the company decided, oh, by the way, you're out of here. We don't need your store anymore. You know, the centre kicked us out, and next are going in. If you know what I'm talking about, you'll know. So I ended up on the dole for a while. Luckily, I got a part-time job, I should say, contracted hours. I haven't got rid of my thing just in case this goes wrong, but I'm still there and I'm getting no money from it. So there's a lot of people like me that are technically on universal credit that don't get any money from it. And I don't know why that point is, but hey, goodbye.
Okay, well, that was an interesting story. Didn't really learn much from it. The original TikTok was good, though.
I've worked 2 jobs since I was 18, and I think too many people don't understand how important and better it is for you to be working hard. My question is, what are you going to do to help more people to come off benefits and back into work?
The Tory members and the Tory MPs have hammered really heavily this idea that we're going to do welfare reforms because there's too many people scrounging benefits. And there are a lot of people who are relying Right, I need to actually put my pop filter back up because, my God, the quality of the sound actually is way worse without the pop filter. That's wild. I didn't even realise how much worse it was. But it seemed like it was a context-adding story around people having universal credit in work, which I mentioned before in the stream, in the segment yesterday. It's a big problem that we have, and that there's a big welfare bill for people who are in work who can't afford to live. Yeah, being on like job seekers. I've never had universal credit. I've never been out of work and on universal credit, but I have been on job seekers allowance. That was just miserable, just absolutely miserable. Being on job seekers allowance. Hated it. I really did. You okay, Stefan? Do you need a hug? Do you need somebody to cuddle you and tell you everything's gonna be okay? You seem like you're a bit angry. You seem a bit mad. Like, the agenda of on welfare has made me feel like a bit like I failed because I've struggled to find work. I mean, I can understand that, yeah. Like the punitive system makes it people less likely to get back into work, I think. Again, it'll all be okay, Stefan. I have faith, Stefan, that you will find some meaning and some peace in your life, that you won't spend your days going into random people's YouTube chats and insulting them because you have very little else going on in your life. And I'm sorry that it's like that, but I promise you, Stefan, things will get better eventually, and you will feel better, and you will find something meaningful to do with your life. Because at the moment, it doesn't look like things are going very well for you, is it? It's really not going very well, Stefan. But I'm sure if you just turn the computer off, put the laptop down, right? Go outside. It's been a pretty nice day today. Go and touch some grass. Go touch some grass, and I promise you things will get better. I believe in you. I have faith. No idea, Solly. Jibs, I'm on universal credit, applied for adult disability too, due to deterioration, mainly my knees because of being a chef for years. I've actually thought about this. Like, do you think there's an argument for different retirement ages based on what sector that you've worked in? Like, we could maybe reduce the retirement age for people who work in, you know, more strenuous fields, but we could increase the retirement age for people who work in fucking offices and some shit, right? Well, I guess we don't have that many people who work in more strenuous jobs anyway. What's interesting as well, I was watching this. Watching this really great conversation between Unlearning Economics and Dean Baker, who's an American economist, talking about how people have this idea that there's a premium on manufacturing jobs, right? On manufacturing salaries. They have this idea that manufacturing salaries are somehow better than everywhere else. And actually, this isn't true. Like, people say, oh, well, demise in manufacturing has destroyed our salaries. I mean, it destroyed your jobs. Like, your areas of the country have been run down by the reduction in manufacturing. But that's not why wages are bad. Wages are bad because of the way in which our government has set up the labour market. That's why you think that your manufacturing jobs were the good jobs, but it's not because they were good for your area because it allowed employment for people who lived in, you know, these industrial satellite towns in the north, for example. But the reasons why these were good jobs wasn't because they were manufacturing. It wasn't the sector that made them good jobs. It was that they were jobs for life. They were vocations that you didn't think you were just going to get booted out of in employment churn. And they were unionized. They were unionized jobs. That's why they were the good jobs that paid well. It's because you had trade union representation. It's not that manufacturing jobs are necessarily better paid, right? Manufacturing jobs don't really pay that well in China and Taiwan and Bangladesh and Indonesia and some shit, right? But they paid well in the UK because they were unionised. That's a really interesting point that Dean Baker made. And actually, it brings me to another point that I really wanted to make. I tried to make on stream yesterday, but I want to make it again today. So the Conservative Party and Reform UK have talked a lot about how this is a cost of living election. There's some immigration election stuff there as well, but they have discussed a cost of living election, which Penny Mordaunt specifically mentioned in one of the leadership debates. And both of them are running on this idea that the best way that they can make work pay is by giving you tax cuts. Penny Mordaunt made this specifically. Reform UK's letters, they've been handing out leaflets, the same around the country. They've got make work pay in big letters on the front of their flyer, which is alluding to the fact that they're going to try and reduce the taxes on working people so that they get paid more. They're both taking this line that the best way of solving the cost of living crisis is through tax cuts. Now, I've explained on stream already why I think the tax cuts aren't actually going to solve the cost of living crisis, because it means reduction in service provision on public services. The people on poor people who are really hit by the cost of living crisis rely on these public services. They are net beneficiaries of the public sector. So tax cuts for everyone to cut back public services negatively affects poor people more than it affects middle class people, for example. Now, that's a bit of a sleight of hand rhetorically to try and get poor people to be able to support tax cuts that are not really in their interest, right? But the other parties, like the Greens, talk sometimes about universal credit. Labour are completely ignoring this, just talk about good jobs, for example. But they're not really talking about the cost of living crisis in terms of how much people earn. Because in truth, actually, tax cuts really don't solve the cost of living crisis for people on the bottom rung of the ladder, the people who are really hit by the cost of living crisis. There is one thing that no one talks about in this election, and it's the most important part of the cost of living crisis. What's happening to wages? How are we going to bring wages up in this country? Sure, Labour talk about good jobs. The Greens are talking about like a higher minimum wage, but that I have some issues with how that affects the Cates Index and the level that they've chosen, and it will only affect some people who are below that minimum wage. And again, it's not going to come into power anyway. But what we're not talking about is the broader wage levels across the economy. Even Labour, when they talk about like trade union bargaining rights, they're only talking about it in terms of the social care sector. The Greens have talked in their manifesto about repealing, like even Thatcherite trade union agreements and trade union laws they want to repeal, which is a good thing, but it's not been brought up rhetorically when it comes to how we discuss this election. In the entirety of all of the debates, every single debate that we watched, whether it's the seven-way debates, the question and answer sessions, or the one-on-one debates between Starmer and Sunak, no one talks about wages. No one's talking about how we get wages up in this country. Boris Johnson in 2019 talked about a high-wage, high-skill economy. Is anyone talking about this now? No, I'm not talking about it. We're not talking about how we go from a low-wage economy to a high-wage economy. No one's talking about the fact that so many people in the public and private sector still have wages that are behind inflation. We get scaremongering about like the wage price spiral, but we don't talk about how wages go up, which is the best way for working people to be able to solve the cost of living crisis. Mick Lynch talked about this. Eddie Dempsey talks about this. They literally said the cost of living crisis has to be solved through the pay packet. We need to rebalance the power of labour and capital in our economy. That's too systemic. That's too Marxist for liberal politicians to talk about. And what I want to talk about is how we actually get better wages in our society. Joseph Stiglitz pointed this out on Question Time. Not a UK politician, he's an American economist, right? Had to be brought over to talk about wage increases. And he mentioned two very specific things that I want to talk about here. Number one, which is investment. Investment is the way in which we can create the extra money available to pay better wages, to be able to attract better wages, and to be able to create the jobs that be able to pay those wages as well, or increase the wages in the existing sectors that need more investment regardless. And of course, Labour had a plan for £28 billion of public sector investment. They had a plan for that. Cut it back. And Joseph Stiglitz even pointed this out, saying, well, no, you had a plan, but you've cut it back now. You're not ambitious enough on the investment that's needed to generate these good wages. That's not the only way that you do it, right? And this is why I mentioned Mick Lynch and Eddie Dempsey. The best way of getting a better wage is a collective bargaining agreement. It's through organising in your workplace. It's through demand-side labour market reform, which comes from having a more lucrative welfare state so that workers have better bargaining positions compared to capital, which is why the Tories like stripping away welfare. It's because it weakens Labour's bargaining position in relationship to capital. And we need better trade union rights, as the Greens have talked about, but they need to be mentioning it on TV. Whenever they're being asked in these panel shows, in these discussions, in these debates, right, how are you going to solve the cost of living crisis? Better wages. Join a trade union tomorrow. Go and bargain for better wages. We have demand-side labour market reforms that we are going to implement. Because people have been lied to. They've been lied to by our politicians. The wages are just a natural artifact of a free market that can never be changed. They have assumed that the free labour market is the only way in which wages get set. No. Wages are a function of how we set those labour markets up. Who sets up the labour markets? The government do. It's state policy that can affect these wages, and why nobody from the neoliberal establishment wants to discuss these in a state-directed manner. Say, for example, you look over at the economies in Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway. Right? They don't have this one-on-one individual wage setting model that we have here that has allowed for in all of these supply-side labour market reform bubble that we live in for the last 14 years of Conservative governance. They completely eschewed that, and wages are set sector by sector through entire bargaining agreements between a consortium of employers within that sector and a consortium of unions that represent those workers, and they come to a collective agreement on what that wage should be. And it's why their wages are higher. It's why their purchasing power is higher in those countries as well. Like, the Big Mac index isn't that much higher for Norway than it is the UK, but their workers are getting paid way more. Their McDonald's workers are getting paid way more in Denmark than they are in the UK, and that's because they're protected by collective bargaining agreements. It's why in these countries, the ratio of CEO pay to worker pay is much lower than it is in the neoliberal countries like here in the United States. Like, I applaud that the Green Party wants to be able to look at this pay disparity. But I think that enforcing it from the top down through laws, I think that enforcing minimum wage laws top down is only a sticking plaster, to coin a phrase from Keir Starmer, over the top of the problems in our labour market bargaining model. Instead of the state mandating these things, it should be the trade unions negotiating these things. Rather than workers having to rely on there being a government in power that does these things for them, they should collectively organise for them themselves. And that's what we need to be having in terms of our bargaining model in the future. That's why you need to join a trade union, which I say every single stream now because it's true. Union density amongst under 25s in this country is only 9%. They've only lived in a world in which market fundamentalism is part of all that they believe. It's very, very tiny representative of young people in this country who are even involved with the trade union movement. And if they spend their entire time thinking about labour market in market terms, rather than through having other ways of setting up these labour markets, we could lose these people to hustle culture, to Gary Vaynerchuk, to Andrew Tate, to all of these Stephen Bartlett types who think, well, your only way of getting a better wage is to improve yourself. And you should improve yourself. I'm a big believer in personal self-improvement and engaging in personal responsibility. But as far as classes are concerned, class consciousness is concerned, even outside of your own personal improvement, and that only goes so far if you're working in a sector where you need to collectively bargain for those better wages to solve the cost of living crisis. So if you're at home and you're a young person, please join a trade union. Please just do it. I know I bang on about it. I literally did a lot of video 6 days ago talk about trade union memberships, but wages are the big problem in the cost of living crisis. And it's why our cost of living crisis is worse here than it is on the continent, than it is in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, where the gap between the haves and the have-nots is smaller. It's why they have better investment, because they want to invest in good workers and good workers' wages there, which we don't have, for example. And that's a problem. That's a big problem that we have in this country. So rather than being sold the snake oil of the entrepreneurial Reform UK dream, which, to be fair, we should be able to protect our sole traders, our entrepreneurs, that's fine, but the real people who actually matter are people who work, all right? And also on top of that, people keep saying, oh, well, if you don't like your job, you should just get a better job. And I'm just like, first of all, individual brain, just get yourself out of the individual brain, go into the collective brain. But second of all, is this isn't how labour markets work, right? We can't all just become management consultants or electricians. If everybody became a management consultant, all of the wages would go down because they'd be flooding the market with new supply. The idea that we can just all immediately just go into better paying jobs, no, that's not how markets work. There will always be people stacking shelves. There will always be people working in prep. There will always be people doing menial labor, things that people would call unskilled, even though it does have some levels of skill, right? There will always be people on the bottom rung of the ladder because there's competition at the top. Rather than treating these things just like a dog-eat-dog world where if you fail, it's your own fault, how about we collectively bargain and we have class consciousness for those at the bottom by wanting the wages up for everybody? Because people can still, if they want to, become management consultants and earn a lot of money. They can still train as electricians and make money in the trade, right? And I would highly recommend that they do. I highly recommend that people do go out and learn a skill, whether it be in the trades, whether it be through having a degree, whether it be through experience and finding that yourself by vertical progression in your own workplace, for example. All well and good. But people will get left behind if we treat those at the bottom as if their own fault that they're there, when that's just how labour markets are set up. So we should change those markets, make sure the wages are up for everybody by having investment, demand-side labour market reforms, and through better trade union bargaining rights. This is how we solve the cost of living crisis. And no one's talking about wages in this election. And I find that is going to be a dereliction of duty because it's not breaking this idea that we have that wages are just what they are because of the market when we literally set it up in that way. And we don't have to. We don't have to. Should that impact small and medium businesses as they would have to increase their costs? I mean, they would have to increase some of their payroll costs, but on top of that, if people have more money to spend, they can spend more money at small and medium businesses. Now, poor people spend all their time shopping at Lidl because they cannot afford to shop at small businesses. If these people have more money in their pocket, they have more discretion with where they can go. And somebody in chat says higher wages cause more inflation. That's not true. Higher wages, at the moment, the biggest piece of evidence I have in the more wages wouldn't be inflationary is that in the midst of the cost of living crisis, we have the single biggest extraction of savings in this country over the course of a pandemic period when the cost of living crisis and the energy crisis first started, right? People withdrew huge amounts from their savings. And they did that because they couldn't afford to live otherwise. That was new demand in the economy. It didn't push inflation up. No, it was a response to cost push inflation. And that's the problem. And also somebody saying the more money you print, the more worth it is. Maybe internationally. And again, it's only relative to other countries printing money as well, right? So this is all relative in terms of the money supply between economy and economy. But internally within an economy, the setting of prices is by supply and demand. So if you increase the supply in proportion to the amount you're increasing the money supply, that's non-inflationary. Again, I'm a leftist. I'm not a globalist. I don't believe in market dynamics being necessarily global, and we should be more protectionist. We should want to increase the supply of goods that we make and build in the UK, for example, create the jobs that are necessary in those sectors. Not because they're better paid necessarily, but I think it would decrease our trade deficit, which would make our currency worth less in comparison to other countries that weren't being as fiscally expansive as we would. But if we have a big amount of internal production and consumption, that additional money supply would be less relevant. Yeah, the studies that we've seen on increases in the floor of wages did show an increase in prices, but purchasing power of working class people increased even with that in mind, right? The wages increased faster than the prices did. There was no wage price spiral. I mean, I love the little prices. I love the little bakery, right? But if I could shop at my local butcher's, right, it's quicker for me to get to the local butcher's than it is for me to get to Lidl. But it's just more expensive, and I can't afford it. If I could afford to shop at the local butchers to keep the wealth inside the community, I would. But I can't afford to. I go to Lidl instead because that's where my money stretches to go. And if we had more local investment in these areas, we could be able to increase the supply of locally owned goods, and the prices would go down. I mean, overheads on baked goods is really low anyway. The margin on baked goods is super high. They can do those things cheaper because the ingredients and the manufacturing and indeed the service of things is also very cheap as well. So you can have baked goods as like food generally has low margins, but baked goods has a very high margin. The profitable items in the food shop subsidize the loss-making ones. Exactly, yeah. Like, it was nice being in Greece and just shopping at like the local shops as well, which was nice, and Italy as well. Flour, salt, and sugar all keep, so baking is cheap. Yeah, exactly. And like dried yeast keeps pretty long as well, if I remember correctly. Right, let's watch this Reform UK racism thing.
We've gone undercover inside Nigel Farage's reform.
Let's actually record this.
We've gone undercover inside Nigel Farage's Reform UK campaign in Clacton, and we recorded extremely offensive language, including this canvasser saying people seeking asylum should be shot.
Get the young recruits there, yeah, with guns on the beach, target practice, just shoot them.
Racist.
I don't see how the UK could move to a worker co-op model without Europe and America freaking out. I mean, I'm not sure. Although it's interesting as well, I talked about good jobs being unionised. Another way of having a different wage setting model is cooperative ownership, so workers are choosing their own wages democratically, right? That's another way of increasing wages, is through more cooperative ownership. There is a reason why the richest and most prosperous area in Italy, the richest province in Italy is Emilia-Romagna, which has, I think it's something crazy, like a third of people who work in Emilia-Romagna are in some kind of cooperative ownership model in terms of their workplace. Like all of these, luxury car manufacturers, all like cooperatively owned, or like a large proportion of them. I forget the exact statistics, but Emilia-Romagna does have like a really strong cooperative model culture, and everybody is paid handsomely because of it.
This language was repeatedly used, here directed at the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
We got it. What's good is he?
And homophobia from Farage's inner circle.
You see that degenerate flag on the front bonnet? What the old Bill doing promoting that crap?
My object is for us to become the voice of opposition.
He's promised a political revolution.
Thank you, Nigel.
Nigel Farage claims to speak for the forgotten many, the self-styled leader of the People's Army.
They've opened up the borders to mass immigration like we've never seen before.
This is the image Reform UK wants to portray, and yet some of the party's candidates have been accused of racism and extremism. It's often dismissed as banter, but how does the party really operate? Media access is carefully controlled, so we've been undercover to find out.
Hello.
Hiya.
How are we doing? All right.
Good luck. I'm fine.
This is what we found when we joined his troops inside Farage's Clacton campaign.
If you've got a razor, feel free to grab a razor. Once you're ready and you're happy, just set off on your adventures.
At this meeting, they're assigning teams to go out leafleting. We meet Andrew Parker, who describes himself as a property dealer.
Yeah, I've got a car, BMW, brilliant. Let's go.
What's your name, fella?
Andy.
Andy.
Mr. Parker tells our investigator he's known Farage for years.
Yeah, I met him in a restaurant in London.
Yeah.
I said, because we're quite a laugh with him.
Yeah.
Do us a favour, get your arse out and put yourself up for candidate. He's rung me a couple of times, I've texted him, so how he's getting on.
We're assigned to go out canvassing with Mr. Parker.
I mean, you say that, Kobashi, but this is literally a day in the life of a true Brexit geezer. We're literally watching right now the day in the life of a true Brexit geezer.
In the car, there's a pep talk about what to say on the doorstep.
The immigration thing, use the word illegal, emphasise illegal, especially if you have...
You could do this undercover stuff, you look like a gammon, but you're anything but. I mean, that's the problem, right? Is that actually most racism in this country comes from the top down. Most kind of bigotry comes from posh people, posh upper class, middle class people, the halls of the Telegraph and our Eton and Haberdasher-asks and all of these private schools in Cambridge and Oxford or whatever it is, right? A lot of the bigotry comes from the established classes and is passed down through propaganda. And actually, really and truly, the gammon stereotype is... It's... Both liberals and conservatives essentially have it in their brains, in their mind's eye. When you talk about the working class, their mind's eye immediately goes to like the turning point Greg's meme, like the North FC guy, when you say working class to these people. And in the conservative mind, they're the noble savage who is the true voice of Britain. Even though they may not be articulate, we believe that they support what we believe in terms of, nationalism and right-wing politics, for example. And liberals treat them like idiots. Liberals treat them like thugs. They think that they're all stupid and they don't know what they're talking about. And they will use this North FC style meme they have in their head as an epithet that they use to denigrate the whole working class, whereas leftists know the working class people, regardless of what they look like, what they sound like, what they are portrayed as, they're smart, they're different, they're multiracial, multi-ethnic, they're people of all different backgrounds and all walks of life who make up the working class, and they cannot be denigrated in these single terms. That's why we're different. And that's why when people say shit like, well, if you lost your job to an immigrant, it's because you're a stupid idiot. And I'm just like, that's because you're a liberal and you're a Thatcherite and you believe in free market economics. Like, we are not the same. I want to help these people get back into work. Like we saw, remember that guy got mad, that guy got livid out on stream. I got absolutely furious when I saw this middle-class academic liberal fubpy type laughing at the Port Talbot guy because he lost his job at Port Talbot Steelworks because of Brexit that he voted for. And I'm just like, yeah, you're laughing at a guy who lost his fucking job at one of the last big steel plants in this country and their entire community is ruined. And you're just sitting there fucking laughing at these people. Like, it's liberal brain rot, it really is. It's because in their mind, they just have, these people are stupid gammons. And I'm just like... No, these people just were sold lies and snake oil and, sympathy for the conned and consent for the con man. But the North FC meme is funny. It is funny. Like, I'm not saying the North FC meme isn't funny, but what I'm saying is that is a certain type of person, not representative of the working class as a whole, yeah. Fubpy will never not be proving why they lose over and over again. Well, exactly. And on top of that, like, gammon doesn't just apply to people with, like, estuary accents who go to the football. It's also, like, remember one of the guys who got mad at Corbyn for not wanting to nuke people was some guy with, like, a massive handlebar moustache. I'm like, this guy's not from, a salt of the earth mining community, is he?
The Reform canvasser then gives his view on Muslims and what the party would do with mosques.
Sick, mate, sick mother. It's a cult. I tell you what, if you don't know about Islam, it's the most disgusting cult out. We're kicking all the Muslims out of the mosques and turning them into Witherspoons.
As well as his opinion on the Prime Minister.
That is racist, but I will say it's funny racism. It is very funny racism that they say they want to turn into Witherspoons. Like, you couldn't make it up. You couldn't make it up, could you? James O'Brien had a caller on earlier that said that she was literally going to keep her kids away from the pores at secondary school. This country is mad right now. Like, I attack Labour for lots of things. But one thing I will not attack them on is the private school VAT policy. Firstly, because it's good and we need to raise money for the Exchequer. But second of all, is that it has exposed the upper middle classes in this Britain to be the whiniest fucking snowflake motherfuckers you have ever seen in your goddamn life, right? Nothing could unite this country broadly more in terms of good redistributive policy than seeing these whiny little bitches get mad about how Tarquin and Felicity are going to have to spend their lives with school mixing with the proles and the poors, right? No more of a bigger sob story of people who are on combined incomes of £160,000 having a good little moan about how their cosseted and disgusting little offspring are going to have to mix amongst commoners. And I'm just like, yeah, I will relish, I will drink your tears. Tasty, tasty middle class tears. Whilst everybody else, the 93% of the country who don't have kids in private school, looks completely out of touch, right? We can't afford to put food on our kids' plates. We can't afford to go and pay the heating bill. You can't afford the extra £2,000 on top of the £10,000 per year you pay for your kids' private education. We are not the same. You are whining about nothing. Get a fucking grip. And if anything has exposed the class division in society in this country, this policy has. And you know what? Fair play to Labour. It's been great. It's unified the country. It's been really, really good to watch.
Rishi Sunak.
I've always been a Tory voter. What annoys me is the he got in. What's good is he? You tell me, you know, he's just wet. What, Sunak? Useless.
4 miles from the town centre, we go door knocking on a mobile home park. Reform sees the mainly elderly people who live here as target voters. Mr Parker introduces himself as representing Nigel Farage's party.
That's quick. Hello there, the Reform Party. Yes. Would you be interested?
He explains party policy on topics including the NHS and climate change.
What's that climate change? Well, it's like complete shit. If you go back something like 10,000 years, and Scotland was hotter than Spain.
And wearing his blue and white Reform rosette, he gives his views on how to stop the boats.
D11 here, and all the place near Dover, army recruitment, get the young recruits there, yeah, with guns on the beach, target practice, to shoot them. That's what the Greeks done. You know about that, you know, the Greeks shot us. Yes. Look at the Australians. None of it. I just think ring fence Bradford-Starn round and just do that. I was like, you've got these bastards running our country. Must be.
There were people in chat earlier saying that Reform UK aren't racist. I'm just like, this man is literally advocating for like, genocide here? Like...
That is a disgrace.
He's probably an Israel fanboy as well, so, you know, it's got that in common. It's incredible also to be climate deniers in, like, a seaside constituency. And, like, you know your guy's going to be first to be underwater, right? This is your brain on nationalism, though. Again, this is a function of how nationalism brain poisons people into creating in-groups and out-groups. It's just fascism. And this is literally just fascism. Just a bit of banter.
You're joking, mate. Keep flying that flag. The reason I'm going to Reform is because the situation is that Rishi Sunak ain't worth pissing on, to be honest.
Mr Parker urges this undecided voter, who says he's a paramedic, to help get Nigel Farage elected. And he offers this advice for treating migrants in his ambulance.
And do us a favour, you're a paramedic and not getting your ambulance, just don't put oxygen on the bastard, use something else. You know where I'm coming from. That's a yes. Yeah.
No, we're all okay, all mate, all right?
Yeah, okay, no worries. Thank you. That's the trouble with brain dead people.
I mean, there's funny, Kubishes. They say, Kubashi, sorry. They say that immigrants create enclaves. What is this other than just an enclave of people? Just a bunch of, like, brain dead boomers, right? Yeah, just a casual, just murder banter. I had a teacher at school, back when I was in secondary school. I literally had somebody, I had a school, it was a guy called Stuart Hill. And one time he was doing a PSHE lesson and he said, I like the Australian model where they just have people on machine guns shooting at boats. So yeah, Stuart Hill, if you're watching, I hope you've changed your mind on this. He was a PE teacher who did PSHE in his spare time, by the way. Just casually telling kids, I think we should gun down migrants at school. You had a history teacher who was in the IRA. I mean, we're watching Nigel Farage's campaign here, up the rah.
In a statement, Andrew Parker told us, I'd like to make clear neither Nigel Farage personally nor the Reform Party were aware of my personal views on immigration. I therefore would like to apologise to them if my personal views have reflected badly on them and brought them into disrepute.
Lovely. I'm saying, I know you have me on record saying that I want to round up all the Muslims in Bradford and kill them. I know I said these things on camera and you recorded me saying it, but I do still believe that, but Nigel Farage doesn't. Apologising to, Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, but you're not apologising to maybe the whole communities you said you wanted to genocide? Just a thought.
Farage has chosen to stand here in the seaside resort of Clacton in Essex. His campaign is being run from 2 rooms above this amusement arcade. He's betting he'll be 8th time lucky, finally being elected to Parliament. The stakes are high. Farage has assembled his most trusted team around him to try to capture this seat.
Lovely.
They include this man, George Jones, a veteran of UKIP and the Brexit Party, now running events for Farage. Mr. Jones tells our undercover investigator why they chose Clacton.
I think it's worth noting as well that not everybody who wants immigration reduced thinks these things and says these things. In fact, in our country, we're usually pretty happy about the migrants that are here. We just don't want any more of them coming, which is obviously an important distinction to make, and this guy's not representative. But, the people who are actually campaigning, who are getting involved in Reform UK, I wonder how many of these people have links to, National Action or Patriotic Alternative type people. I wonder how many of them do. I'm not saying that any of them do, but it'd be interesting to find out.
Shall we look around? Proper England. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Proper English. It's not like in London when you're a foreigner in your own country, and if you say hello to someone, they look like they're about to go knife you in the face. You know what I mean?
The team admit they've thrown all their resources into...
I must say, anecdotal, but I've only ever been mugged by white people.
...winning this seat. There are strict rules about election spending and campaigning. We join Farage's inner team as they discuss the importance of winning for their leader and the financial challenges. Dan Dukes is Reform's national press officer. Roger Gravitt, the party's London area manager. He's also standing for election in Tottenham. And Rob Bates is a senior Reform campaigner.
If Nigel doesn't get in, Nigel never stands again. Nigel probably doesn't stay as leader for 5 years. The whole money thing.
And then there's a discussion about campaign spending limits.
A short campaign, you've got, I don't know, 20 grand or whatever it is, the figure.
Well, yeah, we spent double that already. It's 20 grand minus is 6 for that, so that's only 15.
Exceeding the legal spending limits can result in prosecution. Rob Bates told us he's not responsible for campaign spending and was making a joke. Reform UK said, we're well within the legal spending limits and, like all parties, our returns will be delivered promptly after the close of polls.
And all the bloke at work is voting for Reform because they're traditional, whatever that means. I mean, again, it's nostalgia. It's nostalgia bait. There is this genuine feeling. It's how people voted for Trump under the Make America Great Again slogan. Obviously, Reform says, let's make Britain great. It's very much kind of Trumpian rhetoric in this fashion. Appealing to an older generation of people who feel like the country is not as good as it once was. And maybe it's imperial nostalgia, maybe it's a pre-immigration nostalgia, maybe it's just about when we were a bit more kind of powerful on the world stage, or our economy wasn't so through in the toilet, for example. And this is what this is kind of a call back to, They understand that things are broken, but they don't know why. So if you just try and say, well, there was a previous time where we were great, we can just go back. And I'm like, it's not coming back. All of the institutions have been sold off to mega corporations. All of your jobs, the good jobs, have been subcontracted out and moved off overseas, for example. And all of the methods we had to keep our wages high and our standard of living high have been destroyed by neoliberalism. This is not coming back from the right wing at the very least. It was the left wing that got you these things and the right wing that sold them away. Like a promise to return our country to what it was like when you were growing up, for example. It's not going to happen. You say you want your country back, and I'm like, well, that's a different economic era. But if you can find a singular reason why these things happened, rather than neoliberalism, rather than globalization, rather than mega corporations and the lack of regulation on the super rich and their mobility, and how the way in which we've structured economy post-neoliberalism to essentially give the rich people free rein to do what they want, if you don't tackle these things, you can just say, oh, well, the country's different because there's more brown people now. That is the out-group that they are transposing the failures of neoliberal policy onto. And we see this across the spectrum in Europe. Centrist governments failing to maintain living standards because they sold their countries to the super-rich, and far-right politicians blaming immigration for it. Look at Chega, look at Vox, look at the Sweden Democrats, look at the Finns Party, look at the AFD, look at the FPO, look at the Rassemblement National, look at Reform UK. All of these parties running on a populist right platform of more government intervention to kind of fix the economic problems, whilst blaming migrants for the fact those problems exist in the first place, whilst also doing nothing to challenge the hegemony of megacorporations. Who of these right-wing parties is planning to, I don't know, get rid of investor-state dispute settlements? How many of them are looking to increase taxes or exit taxes on super-rich people from leaving the country to take their assets to the Cayman Islands? Who of these parties are going to inject state funding into cooperative enterprises, into community wealth building? None of them are doing this thing. They're just telling you that they can reduce the retirement age, cut your taxes, get rid of the brown faces from your supermarkets, and everything's going to be fine. It's not a recipe for good governance. The Swedes are seeing it right now. Sweden Democrats are in a supply arrangement with their Conservative Party, and they're tanking in the polls. Both of them are. And the Social Democrats are now way ahead in the polls because these fascists don't know how to govern. Because they've tried to tell everyone the problem was the Browns, and it's not solved any of the problems putting these people in government because their economic policies aren't going to solve the problem from a right-wing lens. That's an issue that they've got. They require there to be an out-group, and now they're in power, they have no idea what to do. And of course, they've been allowed to get to power because people who do want redistribution get attacked by the media for doing it. Doesn't matter whether you're Jeremy Corbyn or Jean-Luc Mélenchon, or whether you're the left bloc in Portugal, or whether you are Podemos, or whether you are Syriza, or whether you are Die Linke, or whether you are the Communist Party in Austria, for example. If you're or Beppe Grillo, if you're somebody who is asking for radical redistribution away from the super rich, they will attack you and side with the fascists, and the liberals will go along with it. Look at how Macron is governing. There's a reason why Pedro Sanchez fought off the right wing, and Olaf Scholz is not doing so. Why Jonas Gahr isn't fighting off the right in Norway. They're not fighting off the right because they haven't been interventionist enough to help regular people, whereas Pedro Sanchez has. And Starmer isn't promising to be enough either, and he will go the way of the AP. He will go the way of the SPD. He'll be going the way of Syriza by not promising these things and not fixing these things.
As Farage's campaign team enjoy a drink in the sunshine, a police car drives by.
This is the shit I'm talking about. That is outrageous.
The car has a pride flag on its bonnet.
You see that degenerate flag on the front bonnet? What the old Bill doing promoting that crap? He's about catching nonsense, not promoting it.
I mean, the car doesn't even look particularly... Well, when we form the government into 2029, then surely we can change lots of things.
But mate, yeah, the policemen going to gay pride marches rather than doing their job to be at first on the list.
I'm surprised there's not an Islamic flag on the back of it.
Well, yeah, true. The big thing that the police love, gay people and Muslims. Traditionally, the police have been real friends to the gay community and to the Muslim communities. There have never, ever been any kind of community disputes between these groups at all, ever. That's never happened at all.
Exactly, but that's the irony of it, though, Roger. That's the irony, mate. That lot and the other lot have got some sort of weird sort of agreement. It's like sort of Stalin and Hitler before they invaded Poland together.
You know, and actually the irony of it is, if the Islamists take over, the people on the front bonnet will be the first up against the wall.
That's the thing. So this is imported rhetoric from France, right? So the way they managed to get Jean-Luc Mélenchon the last presidential election in France, right? The way they tried to attack him, firstly on like the bogus anti-Semitism nonsense, but they also tried to get him on this conspiracy theory they call Islamo-leftism, that somehow leftists and socialists are allying with Islamists to overthrow the West. This is a literal, genuine conspiracy theory that's all the way through the right in France, for example. They are trying to import it here. And obviously they're trying to use the war in Palestine as being emblematic of this, when leftists don't support Palestinians because they're Islamic. We don't do that at all. In fact, lots of the resistance brigades are secular. Like, the biggest, like, part of the Palestinian resistance that's supported by the left is the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, created by a Christian, George Habash, and broadly secular in terms of the politics. We're not backing the Palestinians because they're Muslims. We're backing them because, you know, obviously not the terrorist group. We don't back the terrorist group. We back the Palestinian cause, right? To clarify this, because it's we believe that it is the cause of self-determination. It's a liberal cause of, you know, thinking that genocide and ethnic cleansing is bad and opposing ultranationalism. It's why these people support Israel. They support the ultranationalists and the Israeli right, for example. But the Islamo-leftism conspiracy theory is just this, again, it's all dovetails in with this kind of cultural Marxism, death of the West style stuff, that we are allying with Islamists because we want to join together to overthrow Western democracy, liberalism and capitalism all at the same time. It's nonsense. It's complete nonsense, like absolute nonsense. Like, what progressive values do we share, like, broadly with the Muslim community? Like, there are some crossovers, right? Muslims are not necessarily more socialist than anybody else. It just happens to be that socialist people aren't, like, virulently Islamophobic, virulently racist, right? They'll attach them to political causes that mean that they can actually survive in the world without dealing with racism. Like, they're attaching to our cause, and with good reason, right? Because we are happy to share our countries with people, with different religious beliefs and political beliefs than us, but on top of that, the fact, you know, we with different coloured skin too. Some have never heard of Islamo-leftism. Yeah, because it was just in France, right? It was just a thing in France, right? Because they have a real kind of racial problems going on in their society. It was the way they attacked the left front in the last year presidential election. But it's just seeping into the discourse here, and it's been really turbocharged by the war in Palestine. Must have missed that meeting with the Islamists. So exactly, it's crazy, right? Like, whenever I organise with or talk to Muslims, right, we recognise we have differences in a bunch of social opinions, but we broadly agree on a pluralistic society where we treat everybody with respect. And it's just agreed. Like, no one's fucking conspiring to do anything. We are happy there to be a pluralistic society that we support, because these people don't want a pluralistic society. They do not want pluralism in our society. Islamo-leftism is a thing people actually say, yes, Kazaku, yep. Muslims have strong community values for better or worse and organise around mutual aid as much as leftists do. Oh, 100%, absolutely. Again, I guess the strongest communities that believe in collectivism in the UK at the moment, in the West at the moment, like the broader base for collectivism is in the socialist economic movement and within the kind of, you know, religious social movement. And with the decline of Christianity, Islam and other religions are kind of taking that mantle together. But we support collectivism broadly. There's no conspiracy to overthrow the West or anything like that. It's crazy.
Yeah, of course they are.
How do we help them?
Well, I suggest all our police officers go down to the local gay pride march and dance around like fairies for a few days at the taxpayers' expense.
You'll involve them.
It's not like we've got a crime wave hitting this country, is it? So why not? They've got time to.
We don't have a crime wave in the country. Crime is pretty low.
Kill.
Yeah, but aren't we just going to feed the problem?
This is virtue signalling nonce bullshit.
I mean, George, we're feeding the problem because we're doing 40,000.
Oh yes, I get the very famous old school line of all gay people are nonces. Brilliant, love it. Good. At least this is old-fashioned bigotry, right? You know, even in the younger generation, right, it still pervades.
More. 40,000 more what?
Police officers. So that's the plan. Yeah, but we're going to 40,000.
Muslims might have negative connotations when they hear about socialism because they point out, for example, the Soviet Union and their Islamophobic practices. I mean, that is true, but then you just remember there are plenty of socialist Muslim states, for example. Look at Egypt. or Libya. It depends which part of the Muslim world that you're from. And in fact, there's pretty strong socialist stances in places like Pakistan as well. So at least kind of more kind of social democratic, I guess. But these are like campaigners for Reform UK, I believe. But again, what's also silly about the Islamo-leftism conspiracy is that somehow, by having more socialism in our economy, by being more leftist, we're therefore being less Western. And I'm like, Marxism is Western philosophy. Karl Marx was fucking German. Friedrich Engels lived in the fucking UK. Marxism is Western philosophy. It's not anti-Western. It's not the fall of the West by things being more leftist, being more Marxist. It's fundamentally within the Western canon of Enlightenment thought was what Marxism comes from. And so is postmodernism, exactly. It's so fucking stupid.
Housing straight, you know.
But they'll be also, our police officers will be paramilitaries, they won't be police. We're going to bring back the noose.
Reform told us no political party is perfect. Any individuals who've been identified as making unacceptable comments and holding those views aren't welcome in our campaign. We're running a campaign to represent...
They said the first guy who talks about Rishi Sunak being a peaceler was an actor, but I don't think it's these people.
...all voters in Clacton. Back in the car, the canvasser Andrew Parker is forthright about his position.
Marx is literally buried down the road from you. I used to live down the road from a statue of Engels in Salford.
Now, if you're saying against anyone, you're a racist or this, yeah? Then I'm a racist.
He did the meme! He did the meme! I could be way more racist than you, Angloid! When I talk about racism, I can be way more racist. We're gonna watch it. We're gonna watch it. That's literally what he just did. It's fucking infrared.
Genociding and destroying the culture.
Well, you're just talking like a Mongoloid.
I don't give a fuck. I am a Mongoloid. In my heart, I'm a Mongoloid. That is what I am. We are a horde. That is what we are. Yes, we are that. We are 100% that.
That's not something to be proud of.
It is something to be proud of, because the Mongols are the ones who created civilization. And you created nothing but barbarism. You're the fucking barbarians. You destroyed the treasures of mankind. The Mongols only united it. What the fuck do you know about civilization? What the fuck do you know about pride? What the fuck do you have to be proud of? Except looting, genociding, and destroying the cultures and peoples and wealth of this world. What the fuck do you know, Cans cuck?
Well, you're the one here chimping out, so...
I am chipping out, bitch, because I'm a fucking human being. And you're a little soy boy cuck, little bitch. You don't know who the fuck I am.
No, I see you. I think you're a Mongoloid. That's what you...
I am a Mongoloid. You're right. It is what I am, and I'm proud of being that.
Well, it's an anthropological term. It doesn't actually mean Mongol.
Oh, so what's your fucking point? You ugly, disgusting, fucking barbarian, smelly piece of shit. You want to talk racism? I can be way more racist than you, Angloid. What fucking civilizations did Angloids ever fucking have? It needed the Romans to fuck all of you in your ass to give you any civilization. You never had any of your own. You want to be racist? I could be way more racist. You want to talk shit about Asians? What the fuck do you have on Asia, huh?
I have nothing on it.
You have nothing.
He literally said that you want to talk about racist. I can be way more racist than you. He literally did the meme.
Had enough of it. Go across France and shoot the lot.
Why is there no sound? I am dismayed by the reports of comments by a handful of people associated with my campaign. They will no longer be with campaign. The appalling sentiments expressed by some of these exchanges bear no relation to my own views, those of the vast majority of our supporters, or Reform UK policy. I mean, maybe the latter. Some of the language used was reprehensible. At least he admits that it's bad. Well, wow, that was something. I know, right? Scouse Roy, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That definitely has his finest moment, yeah. The thing is, actually, the worst stuff they were saying was, like, you know, people just say, like, random racist shit all the time. Like, well, it's bad, but, you know, like, I just kind of accept that that's just part of society, right? But people deep in kind of the campaign literature talking in terms of, like, Islamo-leftism, conspiracy theory stuff. You know, like, this is the scary part, because these people are, like, part of campaigning and shit like that. But it was funny to when the with the New Statesman front cover saying, "Oh, Nigel Farage, I've done the most to stop the far right." And I'm like, have you, Nigel? Have you really done lots to stop the far right? Doesn't look like you have from the footage we've just seen. Apparently he's Irish, potentially. Speaking of the New Statesman, I think the New Statesman still have Corbyn derangement syndrome, because I just saw a video on their channel called "Labour is transformed but still haunted by Corbyn," and I want to see these goobers still get mad about the idea that your Labour can't win because of the deadly long Corbyn disease. And it's going to be very funny to watch and see what they have to say. I wonder who they've got in the studio this time. For what it's worth, again, pointing out that the New Statesman is just a spectator for Liberals at this point. Like, they're so reactionary and awful. Let's be fair, I think this one's got Rachel Cunliffe, who's not as bad as the others.
George, you've interviewed the Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, and also Torsten Bell, an economist who is almost certain to be a Labour MP. And we've also got an interview with Jeremy Corbyn by Oliver Eagleton about the battle in Islington North, where Corbyn is running as an independent against a Labour candidate. George, what do you think is interesting about the Corbyn fight, first of all?
Well, what's interesting about that fight, it's very rare for independents to win. Most of the time, it's the big parties have the advantage because they have the party machine and they have the data. But if you have a genuine personal following, you can pull off a victory. And Corbyn has been MP for Islington North since 1983. Obviously, his Labour leadership massively raised his profile and it has a degree of loyalty. But the polling on this shows it's going to be a close fight. That I think some assumed that Corbyn would walk this race. That was never going to be the case because, as I say, Labour do
uphill
have
struggle with an independent candidate.
Advantages. And some close to Corbyn are worried actually that people don't realise he's not the Labour candidate. Because the switch came relatively late in the sense it wasn't until the campaign that he was.
I mean, yeah, it just shows you how cucked out Jeremy Corbyn always was, and how this strategy that we had was always going to fail. Just continually kowtowing to the Labour Party. Just continually kowtowing to the Labour Party without properly understanding their relationship with you, to the point at which Jeremy genuinely believed they might let him stand as a candidate for like 6 months and then announced his candidacy with 2 weeks to go. And I'm like, yeah, they've screwed you over again. Like, you should have started your campaign months ago and maybe you'd win. And he's gonna fucking lose because he spent ages hoping upon hope that they would be nice to him when he's dealing with the nastiest people in politics. Again, admirable. The guy is a very trusting individual and I think that's fine. But it just shows you that the project was doomed from the start because we couldn't actually take to this fight. We couldn't actually take the fight to the absolute despicable rodents who populate the Labour right. We were never going to be able to appease them. We spent far too much time being nice rather than being ruthless.
Actually expelled from Labour. They're genuinely worried that some people might just tick the Labour box out of habit. But what makes it significant is that if he does win, it will create a different atmosphere in Parliament because you will still have that radical left figurehead. If Labour take that seat, then they will be able to simply move on from him. If they don't, and he's there in Parliament and still out campaigning as an MP, he will haunt Labour. It'll be a permanent reminder of the divisions of the last 5 years.
I thought it'd be fascinating to have Corbyn in the magazine. You know, as I said to you at the beginning, we're
Interesting as well. They say, oh, he's going to haunt them for the period in the divisions, and I'm like, yeah, he bloody well should, right? Not that there are any divisions left because of the people who support anything actually left wing, been purged from the party or have left regardless, right? 21 members of Islington North CLP resigned their memberships to go and campaign for him today, and good thing too. Good thing too. You know, the CLP has been treated like absolute dog shit by the Labour establishment, and he should absolutely haunt them. Although if he does, like, you know, start his own party or his own movement, he shouldn't be the figurehead. He shouldn't. He should be in the background helping galvanise and organise people. But we need a new figurehead. We can't just be banging around the same Corbyn drum. I feel like Pete Burns coming out of Celebrity Big Brother, being told that they're re-releasing You Spin Me Right Round, and going, no, I can't be spinning round forever. It's true, you know, we need to move on. But as long as he's there galvanising support, you can unite behind somebody else. You know, a potential Pfizer gene or something.
we're unpredictable and we're heterodox. And it's a very interesting piece by Oliver. He's been out on the road with him in Islington, and Oliver's asking him, what was that all about? That kind of, he calls it a radical left populist moment. Extraordinary number of votes for Corbyn in 2017, obviously lost in 2019. But he also, in the way Farage has, he also unlocked something very powerful in 2015. And a lot of young people in particular responded. You know, he unequivocally rejected austerity, and he rejected the political status quo and the timidity of Labour as it was. And, you know, in some ways, George is right. He continues to haunt the party and the left, and he still has a following. And
this is the first time that I have seen somebody from the liberal left acknowledge that it wasn't just Trotskyists. It wasn't just militant tendency rising from the graves to do entryism into the Labour Party. No, it was just a genuine movement of young people from all walks of life, all socioeconomic backgrounds, who believed in an anti-austerity policy platform, joining the party and upsetting the cosy roost that the Labour right had made for themselves, and that was where the anger came from. Not that there was this radical left insurgency. It was just young people who hated austerity and wanted it to be rejected. And finally somebody has admitted it, just on some little podcast bit on New Statesman's YouTube channel, and not in like any of the major newspapers. Because it's true, again, like it was a moment of young people rejecting austerity. It wasn't some kind of Trotskyist, Leninist, fucking vanguard moment, really.
Something poignant about it. Here he is, age 75, still fighting, still agitating, still going out on the street. And we've called it Corbyn's last stand, and it may well be. But what Corbyn says in the piece is, even if I'm defeated, the forces that I represent won't be defeated. You know, they come again. He's an internationalist. He references what's going on in Latin America. He's encouraged by recent elections in Mexico and in Brazil. And he thinks there's still a big constituency for the kind of politics he represents. So it makes for a very, I think, an interesting mix of pieces in the magazine this week.
Yeah, and in an election where we know the end result,
we know the result
already,
that
right. Seat is really interesting because, as George says, no one knows which way it's going to go. George, you've also interviewed Jonathan Reynolds, Shadow Business Secretary, in a piece that kind of captures how Labour has changed its attitude to business and the economy since the Corbyn era. Why did you choose to interview him? Why did you think he was an interesting figure?
I think first, as you say, because the new marriage between Labour and business, as we call it, really is striking. That attitudes towards the party have been transformed in just a single term. That's partly because the Conservatives have provided business with plenty of excuses to metaphorically defect. Not just Liz Truss, but Boris Johnson, F Business, and polls of executives show they're mainly backing Labour. Tickets to the party's business day sell out at the speed of sort of Taylor Swift tickets. Now, I think some of this is just wanting to get close to the next government, but there's a genuine alignment on planning reform. The Conservative Party have been desperately sort of cautious and feeble on planning reform when one of the things the country needs to grow the economy is to get building again. But why is Jonathan Reynolds interesting? Well, he spearheaded this. He's trusted in the city, but he's also got an interesting personal story, which we discussed. So describes himself as a Christian socialist, chair of Christians on the left, one of the few Christians in the new cabinet in waiting.
He comes from a very working class background, like other members of the shadow cabinet, which is unusual even for Labour, right?
Yes, working class background in the northeast, and as you say, there are many of them: Wes Streeting, Bridget Phillipson, Starmer himself, David Lammy. That gives them a degree of it gives them a class consciousness. They're class aware. It's not class war, because it's not antagonistic, but they have a heightened awareness of class and inequalities, which continue through British life. And you see that alignment of the sort of personal and political with the stance they've taken on private schools and
not on the 2-child benefit cap though, apparently. Yeah, literally, we're streeting going, well, I lived off of government support when I was a child, but fuck giving the current children that same support, eh? Hey?
Levying VAT on them. Reynolds, interestingly, father of 4, had his first son at the age of 22. He's severely autistic, and one thing those close to me said is that it explains his very even temperament. He's often described as one of the nicest people in politics, and when you've had an experience like that, becoming a father at a young age, difficult circumstances, I think you realise that you don't get too het up over small day-to-day things in politics. You know that life is complicated and hard, and that, I think, gives him sort of kindness as well.
He's a very decent man, I agree, yeah.
The class element and the background element of this new cabinet is going to be fascinating. So Reynolds, I learned from your piece, his father was a fireman, his mother was a dinner lady. You've also got the flagship interview.
Well, not a toolmaker. Nope, not working class, don't care.
In this edition, which is David Lammy, who also has a background in Tottenham that encapsulates a lot of the trends around class and globalisation and sort of social mobility. Jason, you went on the road with him around both Tottenham and the US.
Yeah.
What's he like? What's at the heart of David Lammy?
Yeah, he's a fascinating figure, David, which is why I wanted to write about him and travel with him. We went to Washington, and he's in opposition, no money, no entourage. Going with David to Washington, travelling around town in Ubers, it was a hectic trip.
I mean, I'm already kind of bored. They're going to discuss anything else here?
His father. Recently, David was riding that educational escalator, some of them to Oxbridge. Angela Rayner certainly not. I mean, she leaves school at 16. And
and also calling for a second referendum pretty much immediately afterwards, very anti-Brexit. How does that all fit with what Labour's foreign policy seems to be now?
I'm fucking bored of this shit. New Statesman. I mean, whatever. I mean, I basically try and avoid New Statesman now because they have Hannah Barnes on their podcast basically all the time, and Hannah Barnes is a fucking disgusting slug, and I do not want her to be anywhere near my fucking vision, peripherally or directly. So yeah, about that. Oh, sprint qualifying highlights. We'll definitely have to watch that. So Economics Help has just released a video called "Why the UK Got Stuck in a Doom Loop of Low Economic Growth," and I'm just like, just austerity. And I know the Taylan Pettinger knows this. So, what's the whole obsession with oppressions of parents? That's where class comes from. Apparently, it's not how you relate to the means of production. It's literally what your parents did when you were growing up, right? It doesn't matter that I live off of slightly above minimum wage at the moment. My parents are computer programmers, so apparently that makes me middle class forever, and I'll never change that. Like, because they can't even talk about the actual jobs that these people did, right? Let's look up Jonathan Reynolds. Wasn't he like a lawyer or something? Yeah, like, they talk about, oh, well, his mum and dad did, like, these jobs or whatever, but he was a fucking solicitor. He was a solicitor. That is not a working class career that he comes from personally, right? It's all about what you did when you were a fucking kid and what your parents did, rather than your own relationship to society. Your own relationship to the means of production. No, we do that tomorrow, Davinia. And like you look at, you know, I mean, West Street has been a career politician, basically. David Lammy, apart from, you know, being a DJ on LBC and getting loads of expenses. Like, he got a law. And this, he became a lawyer. They're both lawyers. They're both lawyers. It's not, like, it's not working class. This isn't a working class background. Like, whereas, right, Angela Rayner, right, let's bring up Angela Rayner, you know, her mum and dad were from working class backgrounds too. What did she do when she was growing up? She was a representative for Unison after being a carer. This is a working class woman. This is a person who came from a blue collar career. Don't give a shit about what your parents did. Don't give a shit about how wealthy your parents were when you were growing up. Don't give a fucking shit. What did you do? What is your relationship to production? No worries, Scribby. I'll see you in a bit. The parent definition of class is a measurement tool. If I'm a trust fund babe but I work at a charity shop or something to do, then on a survey I would look working class, but I'm not. I guess, but that's a very tiny selection of, well, what is your material interest in terms of setting policy? I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a Marxist. Like, I believe in two classes of bourgeois and proletariat. I don't believe in, you know, the cultural class that we have in the UK. I can give a shit, but whatever. So to finish off today, exclusive, Labour set to land billions in new investment from banks and international firms within months as part of a plan to use private finance to rebuild Britain. Love it. Literally doing exactly the same as what Blair did, rather than using fiscal expansion to pay for infrastructure, because it might push up interest rates and make mortgage holders upset. They're going to put it as private finance and then sell the future of the country down the river. Again, you know, buying votes now at the expense of votes later by keeping people's mortgages low potentially, even though I don't think that's necessarily true, that new fiscal expansion would necessarily push up interest rates. And the way this is being framed by Patrick Maguire, is that more on just how heavily Labour is relying on private investment in PFI 2.0 from Bloomberg, they're describing it as getting BlackRock to rebuild Britain. And I don't need to tell people in my chat, or indeed people who believe that the World Economic Forum are going to destroy the world by undermining the West or whatever, BlackRock are the enemy. Like, they're not the enemy because they're just like a secret cabal of DEI investors, like a cabal of people at the top of society or whatever. And, like, Larry Fink isn't universally an evil person, right? They have bad material interests that do not align with the working class. They are rentiers. They're economic parasites. They do not provide anything, but they take. They represent capital. They're not evil because they're globalists. They're evil because they're capitalists. They're bad because they're capitalists. And they're not evil individually. They represent an evil force, which is the force of capital, right? BlackRock are bad because they are taking money that should be going back into our exchequer, should be going back into the pockets of the people who own the stuff collectively. No, it means that infrastructure will be owned by people who do not have an interest in the prosperity of the country, who do not have civic national pride because they're foreign investors. If you're a nationalist, you should be agreeing with me on this. But the worst problem is they are rentiers. They make money off of money. They do not make money off of being productive. And I told you this would happen. I told you this would happen. Yet we're being told these are people that are fucking bastions of the left. My fucking heaven forfend. Anyway, we're going to leave the stream there. I'm going to raid you all out into Novara Media over on YouTube. Thank you very much. Please subscribe, Patreon, memberships, bits, subs, all the month. Give me money, please. I'll be back tomorrow with more content. We'll be watching Adrian Ramsey. doing question time. As always, take care. As always, stay safe. And as always, free Palestine. The question is, where am I going to raid you into over on Twitch? Thank you, Scoutraw, for the bits. Appreciate you. Central. Actually, that's true. I have not raided Mike from PA before. And if anything, and if I'm ever going to be somebody, I'm going to be a clout chaser. So I guess I will do that, and I will clout chase by raiding into Mike from PA. No, actually quite like Mike from PA. I know that he's a bit of a meme at this point, but I think you know, broadly his politics are pretty kind of similar to mine in terms of, you know, community based and things like that, municipal socialism, but. And I think we have broad similar takes on electoral politics. I'll raid you over into Mike from PA. YouTube, you're going to go into Novara Media. Thank you very much, and I'll see you